Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the November meeting of the Weston Creek Community Council. Tonight we have a pretty full agenda. It's all revolving around planning. I'm interested to see how many people online. Last month we had 180 views on video. Not so many in the room because it was so wet. But anyway, look, I will invite our speakers from the EPSDD. Ben, Aaron and Andrew, please sit down there. And Ben is going to do the, acknowledgement of the country for us. Looks good. No.
Okay, can you all hear me? Yes? Great, okay. Dara. Hello, this is Ngunnawal Country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we meet on today, the Ngunnawal people, pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are in the room or online joining us today. Are we happy to go straight into our presentation? Okay. Alright, now for those who don't know me, my name is Ben Ponton. I'm the Director General of the Environment Planning and Sustainable Development Directorate, and I'm also the ACT's Chief Planner. So I've got my colleagues here, Dr. Aaron Brady, who's the Deputy of EPSDD, and Matt Cameron, who's the Project Director for the Planning System Review and Reform Project. Today, we wanted to have a conversation with you about the project itself, this next phase of the project, and the opportunities for you to get engaged. So we acknowledge that these documents have only been out for a short period of time. We're not expecting this to be a detailed workshop. What we're wanting to do is share information with you, make sure we've got the information available to you to know where to look. We'll point you in the direction of a few particular documents that people will be particularly interested to you, and then we'll also take you through the opportunities, as I said, for further engagement. I might go to the next slide. So I'm going to just give you a recap, and then I'll hand over to Dr. Brady to talk to you about district strategies, and then Matt will talk to you a little bit more about the territory plan, which is the statutory document. So to do a recap, the principles and elements of the new planning system. So you'll see this in the black circles there, three key pillars, if you will, of the new planning system. The new Planning Act. So we have a planning bill, which is currently before the Assembly. And there's currently a committee inquiry in relation to that bill. We also have what we're here to talk to you tonight about, which is the district strategies, and also the new territory plan, which, as I said, is the document that not only do we as a planning authority assess development applications against, but importantly it's the manual, again if you will, that proponents will use to guide their concepts as they start to develop their thinking for a particular project. The principles. We look for a planning system that is easy to use. We're wanting to provide certainty and flexibility. Now that may seem like they would be contradictory, but we believe that we can achieve both. So in terms of flexibility, what we're looking to achieve there is, and you would have heard me talk about this before, a people-focused, outcomes-focused planning system. So planning system that delivers for the people of Canberra. To achieve that, what we're concerned about with the current system is it's very rules-based or prescriptive, numerical standards, and it doesn't encourage people to stop and think about their particular project, how it will respond to the street, the precinct, will it be a good neighbour, what happens to the spaces left behind, how we can move around the building, because what they're driven to do is just think about what's the height, what's the setback, how many apartments can I get, what's the open space in square metre, from a square metre perspective. They're not stopping and thinking about, well, what do we really want this place to be? Not just the building, but the broader place, the precinct. So, having said that, we want to make sure that we've got the ability for people to innovate and really think about the outcome and achieving those really high quality outcomes for the Canberra community. But we've heard through the consultation process there are certain things that are non-negotiable. That's where the certainty aspect comes in, and Matt will talk a little bit about this in terms of how we structure the plan. We know that there are certain things, so for example, that being in a residential zone, RZ1 zone, height will be something that is non-negotiable in terms of it being 2 stories. So that's what we've included in the plan, because we know that there are certain things that are really important to people. Transparency, that comes back to the bill, so I won't spend too much time on that today, but we have spent quite a bit of time thinking about how we can improve transparency in the development assessment process and incorporate that into the planning legislation that's going before the Assembly. And as I said, outcomes focus, so really getting proponents to think about what is it that we can actually get this development to be a respectful neighbour and contribute to the well-being of the local community. So with that said, I might hand over to my colleague Brady, who will run you through the concepts in relation to district strategies. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, so for the district strategies, the draft district strategies, there are 9 out for public consultation at the moment. So what we did was we divided Canberra into 9 districts. A lot of them are on the basis of the current statistical boundaries for districts of Canberra. So we broke it down partly because we wanted to provide a different level of detail than what's in the planning strategy. So in the current system, you jump from the planning strategy that's all of Canberra-wide and the ACT, then you jump down to a site in the territory plan. So we heard from people that they really would like to have a bit more of an idea of what the planning is at a different scale for Canberra. So that's why we broke it down into districts, and we flagged that in the planning strategy in 2018. So we've used the 9 districts. Again, if people want to make comments on the districts and why we've decided on those, that's one of the things people can comment on. So for each of the districts, in preparing the district strategies, basically we gathered lots of data, did lots of mapping of all different layers of information about Canberra. We put all those together, and then we worked out where are there some opportunities to accommodate growth and change, and where are there some areas that are really important that we might need to preserve or do some work to make sure that they maintain their value. We also did some consultation in 2021 asking people what was it that people valued in their districts. And we heard a number of things that were common across all of Canberra, but we did hear some that were quite particular to certain districts. For example, in Weston, the landscape is a lot more noticeable than it probably is in Molonglo, because it's a much more developed area, an older area, and the built form in this area is quite different to, say, Gungahlin or somewhere. So we did hear some different views on what was valued. So we've tried to take all of that into account. We've looked at what the population growth is that's projected into the future. We've got some more work to do on that because the population projections have actually been a little bit higher than when we started doing the work. So we looked at what's the population projected to be in the future for Canberra, how do we want to attract business to Canberra, how do we want to attract people to live in Canberra, but how do we maintain the things that are important to us about Canberra, including it's a city in the landscape and those sorts of things. So we took all that information, tried to work out, okay, what are the opportunities to accommodate growth in the future, what's important for us to take account of if we're planning for growth in the future. So that's where the 5 drivers come from. So the 5 drivers are really what underpin the planning that we did. So the blue-green network, that's identifying where it's important for us to conserve and take notice of some of the environmental values, biodiversity mapping that our colleagues have done, opportunities for biodiversity corridors, where are there green spaces that we need to preserve or we might want to put in place to help with connectivity, riparian corridors, ways that we can expand maybe on the Healthy Waterways program and treat our waterways in a different way to what they're historically treated as a not just concrete kind of water channels. So there's some opportunities around that you'll see in different districts. So that's the blue-green network, so that's quite important. Sustainable neighbourhoods, That's looking at the district and making sure that there's a diversity of housing to accommodate diversity of population in those districts. We know it's important with people ageing, they want to age in place. A lot of people have told us they want to stay in the same district that they're in or the same sort of local community. So we've looked at what are some options around. Are there areas around, particularly centres, where there are facilities or transport corridors where we could maybe change zoning to have more of what we've heard from people they want, which is townhouses. Not just apartments, but a more diverse supply of housing types. So you'll see some areas, and I'll show them to you on the map shortly, that are yellow, and that's generally where we've suggested we might be able to investigate those options. Inclusive centres and communities, that's us thinking about, well, if we're growing, people are ageing, population is getting diverse in different ways, what are the facilities and services that are needed to support those people? So we need to look at, in some areas you'll see that we've proposed we need to do some community needs assessment to make sure that we're providing the right facilities. We're talking to our colleagues across government about how services are provided in different ways and will be into the future. So that comes into that part. Economic access and opportunity across the city, that's looking at centres, making sure that districts and the city as a whole has innovation hubs, education hubs, active centres with a range of services. So you'll see that in different areas, and you'll see when I get to the map, there are a couple of centres that we've identified in Weston that might need some attention, and then there might be some opportunities there. And strategic movement to support growth. So that's obviously around movement and transport, but not just light rail, and you'll see some of that explored in the district strategy, not just light rail and buses, but pedestrian, cycle, making sure that we've got a range of options for people and transport. And so you can see where a lot of them cross over. So that's the 5 drivers that really have underpinned the way we've approached the planning. Then for each district strategy, we've taken those drivers and we've set some directions for that district. So we've tried to accommodate all of the information that we've looked at through the analysis of mapping and data, what we've heard from community, and we've identified what we think are some important directions for us and for the community, for the future, for that particular district. So you can see Rivet and Duffy, we're saying that blue-green corridors and making connections are important. We know bushfire risk is an important factor here, and certainly for Molonglo as well. So we know we need to take account of that. And as I said, we've worked with our colleagues across government to make sure that we're getting all the information that we can on different layers of information. So the district strategy has those directions. The district strategies you'll find, sorry, I should have said this earlier, the front part of the district strategy is the same for all districts, and it's the metropolitan context. So it gives the whole of Canberra context, and then you go to, I think it's part 4 or part 5, that focuses on the particular district. But then when we go into the district, we actually pull apart the 5 drivers, so you'll see a different sort of subsection for each driver and a different map for each of the drivers, as well as a consolidated one. So I know it's really hard for you to see on here, but the consolidated map basically is all of those layers put together and then identifies where we think there are some opportunities in Weston. So some of the things that you might want to take note of to give us feedback on, for example, is we haven't projected a really significant change in population in Weston. It's a pretty small population growth. But do you think we've underdone that? Do you think it should be higher? The reason we've come to that is partly because a lot of the development in Weston is single residential. So when we take account of all of those other drivers, we've thought about, well, where are the opportunities if you did provide more housing and more diversity because people want to stay in their area but maybe downsize?
Before you go on, we're talking about Weston Creek now. We know it's Western Suburb, Weston Creek.
Yeah, Weston Creek. district, whole district, yeah. So some of the areas that you can just see there that are pale yellow, they're areas where we've proposed that there might be some opportunities for us to think about perhaps townhouse development because they're close within walkable distance to a centre. We've also flagged, you can see a couple of centres are flagged with a line around them. They're centres that we think might need a bit more attention. And when we've looked all across Canberra, we've found certain centres probably need a little bit more love and attention, and then there might be some opportunities there. They might service the community better than what they currently are. So there's some of the things around the centres that we've looked at. We've looked at transport corridors. We've looked at the option of if light rail was to, for example, go from Molonglo through Weston Creek and to Woden, what would that mean? Or if it was a different transport option, what would that mean for people? And what would the opportunities be then that might arise from that? So we've also identified 12 implementation pathways. Some people have said they're too many and maybe you could reduce them and you could combine some of them. So again, happy to get feedback on that. But they're really trying to outline how we propose to implement any of this. And some of this it flags, we need to do more investigation, we need to do some more community needs assessment, we need to do investigation around the viability of transport routes, we need to do investigation to see whether it might be possible to look at what it would mean for rezoning areas to provide for townhouses, those sorts of things. So the implementation pathways, by all means look at them and give us feedback if you think we've covered them. There are too many. They're not in order of priority, so it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 all the way through. There's no order of priority. If you think there should be, again, let us know about that. But that's sort of a really quick run through what the district strategies are. But just, I guess, for you to look at them, it's a lot to absorb, but the metropolitan part is giving the context at the front, and then that back part that steps through the drivers for the district and what we're proposing for the future of the district. That's what we really want you to give us some feedback on. So with that, I'll hand over to Matt, who's going to talk to you about the territory plan and how some of this will flow through the territory plan.
Thank you, Erin, and good evening, everybody. So just before I move on to the territory plan, the district strategies that Erin's just been speaking about, they are available on our Your Say webpage, and to assist you reading through them, we actually have a snapshot that we've provided as well. So there's a shorter document that gives you a brief overview of the specific changes and proposals that are made in the Weston Creek district, but otherwise the full 150 odd pages that provides the overview at the metro scale, and then the roughly 50 pages that focuses on Weston Creek is available for download at the Your Say webpage.
Excuse me, I just want to clarify something. This has got, thanks very much for the opportunity to get this sort of presentation. But are we able to, we have questions, this is the first I've seen this really. Do we have the opportunity tonight to ask some questions to clarify what means to us? Some of us have been here for 50 odd years, you know. And well, it is, when you talk about 150 page documents, you know, I can flip through and pick up bits and pieces. But I and maybe others have some specific questions. Do we have the opportunity to ask them?
Great question, and the answer is today what we're intending to do is to give you that overview, and we can certainly take some questions, but I'm also going to provide you with the opportunities that we have for detailed workshops that we're providing. And in fact, the last slide I speak to is an opportunity for residents and people interested in the Weston Creek district strategy to come and meet the planners who have been responsible for drafting and driving the Weston Creek district strategy in an hour and a half session. And I'll tell you where it is when I get to the slide. I think it might be here.
Will you tell us the rough time frame?
Well, it's next week. Yeah, so it is actually occurring, I think, next Monday.
Of the workshops?
The workshop?
The plan, implementation,
yeah, absolutely.
These ideas which are very new ones.
Yeah, so they look at, and we can speak more at the workshops and answer some questions after this, but certainly we're looking at medium, short-term and longer-term aspirations for the district. So we will speak to that at the end. But perhaps if I can take you then to the territory plan. So as Ben indicated, the territory plan is the statutory document which gives effect to the new outcomes-focused system. It takes the principles that we've looked at in terms of that new system, making it easier to use, outcomes-focused, flexible, and providing certainty, and it actually applies it in the district in the documents. So its intention really is to provide a stronger link between the strategic, spatial and planning provisions, and those strategic provisions are those that we're now setting out through the district strategies. And you'll see through the new structure of the new territory plan that it reflects the intention of the district strategies by moving to district-based policies in one of the changes. Now, the new structure which is here, this diagram actually appears within the new territory plan, sets out the framework for the statutory document, and it's set down into 7 parts, the first of which is administration and governance, and the second being user guidance, and that's really trying to pick up on that usability and easy-to-use process that we're trying to instill in the new planning system for proponents, for decision makers, and for people who are interested in the planning of individual developments. The planning principles in Part C reflect the principles that have been set out in the new planning bill, and we've spoken about that, but it is a reflection of those principles that have been set at a high level, that are worked down through the district strategies, and then to the territory plan where you're actually applying those principles at a site-specific scale. The dictionary and annexures I won't spend any time on, but then move to the 4th part of the territory plan, which are the district policies. And so these district policies pick up on many of the provisions that are contained in the current territory plan in each of the precincts. So when you have at the moment those for each suburb, we're now applying them at a broader level for the district. So there is a district policy for Weston Creek, a district policy for Woden, and for all of the other districts in the ACT. We then have zone policies which reflect current zoning. So we've got your RZ1s through to commercial and mixed use, and those make up those kind of key central chapters of the proposed territory plan. If I take you over to the grey side, you'll see that what we're doing in the new territory plan and the new planning system is to provide supporting material that assists in the interpretation and application of the document. So the district strategies, as we've talked about, provide that district level direction that is to be given effect through the territory plan. As under the new planning bill, the territory plan must give effect to the planning strategy and may give effect to principles and directions that are contained within the district strategies. We then include both design guides and technical specifications. And before I talk about the design guides, I should say that as part of the material that we have out on public consultation, we have prepared what's called an explanation of intended effects. So that's a document that sets out the themes that we want the design guides to achieve, and we're asking people to read through that document, to provide feedback on the outcomes, the built form outcomes, the public realm outcomes that they would like to see in their districts, and that will be applied through the 2 design guides, one of which is an urban design guide and the other which is a housing design guide. Those design guides will be developed over a period over the next 3 months and will be released along with the rest of the public of the system when it is introduced. And the intention for those is to really start to help people see what Ben's been talking about, how buildings are good neighbours, how they perform in their context, how they interact with the street, items like cross ventilation, solar access, while they'll also be contained in the provisions of the territory plan as things that must be considered and addressed in a development application. We'll also have that specific user guidance to assist and encourage people who are developing to do so in a way that is good for the community and good for the district. So, you had a question?
Yeah, I don't know why you've got the zones in there, because like I've looked at the maps and you're replacing most of the zoning with urban characters. So So T4, T5, T6, which means you're going to replace a whole lot of RT1 places with 3-storey apartments or 6-storey apartments.
I think you're actually, so you're actually speaking about the transit, which is contained at the end of the
But
document,
it's
which is...
clear in your documents you will be replacing those zones with those transits.
We'll take the question at the end, and perhaps we can speak to that a little bit further, but the zones that are contained in the territory plan at the moment,
And you're allowing non-conforming applications.
I'll just finish up and then we can come to the question, thank you. So the technical specifications will be those that replicate what's currently in most of the general codes, so you will see that the numerical provisions which need to be, may be complied with, and in the new system they won't be mandatory, they will be considerations, because using the design guides there will be other ways to achieve those outcomes, but those technical standards are there to assist people who are building. Now, I'll move on so we can get to your questions, but there is a lot of change in the territory plan, and what we've done is prepare a very good document called the supporting report to help people navigate that. It's about 96 pages, so it's not short by any means, but it is certainly what I would recommend you start off with when you're wanting to engage with the new territory plan, and it really does set out the proposed changes in structure, the policy changes that are being made within the document, the changes to definitions, and the changes to some permitted uses in zones. It also includes some site-specific changes, not in this district, but one example would be the Phillip Pool in Woden. So to move you to the last two slides, our consultation has commenced on the 1st of November, and we're going through for a period of 3 months. We are currently in the share phase. We've been going through the district, speaking to the community and engaging in both pop-ups and workshops. Those pop-ups are an opportunity for people to come in, ask some questions, get some clarification, but again to do the same in the evening and to work through with our planners to provide an overview and assist people to navigate these documents. We're then giving a period of time over the Christmas break and into the end of January for people to consider, to sit, to think about those documents, to engage with their friends, with their families, with their communities about what they see in the documents and to start distilling the feedback that they want to give. And then we'll be spending time in late January through to mid-February working with the community directly, hearing feedback and doing listening and workshops in the community prior to the conclusion of the public consultation period on the 14th of February. We'll then spend time considering the feedback that we've received, and then we'll provide the revised version of the territory plan district strategies for further introduction to the Assembly in mid-2023. Some of the areas that we'd ask you to focus on when you're looking at the district strategies and the territory plan are, as Erin said, the character of your districts, the 5 big drivers and how they apply in your district, looking at the local centres in your district and considering whether those that we've highlighted are the ones that you think need urgent attention or any attention, or whether there are other areas that you think might be more ripe for that kind of initial consideration for actions that could revitalise them. With the territory plan, the questions that we are asking are, do you think that the new territory plan makes the system easier to engage with and easier to navigate? What are the factors that we should include as those mandatory provisions in the territory plan? And those are those assessment outcomes which we've included, which we have heard need to be retained, but we want your feedback on whether we've captured all of them, whether there are more, or whether there are those that should actually not be considered mandatory. The structure of the design guides, how they relate to the buildings is something else that I'd encourage you to provide feedback on, but generally I would suggest that any feedback that you receive is something that we're interested in receiving so that we can consider it as we continue with this work. So again, the USA webpage is where you can find all of the details, and the pop-up events for the Weston Creek District are next Monday on the 5th between 10 and 12 in Coolum Port, or between 2 and 4 at the Revette shops. And then the Weston Creek Community Workshop will be here between 6 p.m. and 7:30 next Monday. So that's the end of the presentation. Happy to take some questions.
Just to make sure we manage it very well to people at home, Can I ask people who want to ask questions to come to the microphone so people at home reviewing the video later can hear it, and also to assist our secretary writing minutes. Thank you. Brad?
Weston Creek. Who made the decision to do the consultation over the holiday period? You must have got a memo for a public servant. Don't do that sorts of thing with people. You do consultation in normal periods during the year, not over the holiday period, especially for such complicated documents which clearly show the removal of zoning and the replacement of existing homes and green spaces with multi-storey buildings, not multi-unit buildings, but multi-storey buildings. Who made that decision?
Okay, so in terms of the consultation period, that is a decision of government. Now, we have heard that from a number of these sessions that we've attended that you would like to see that extended. That's a decision that's not mine to make.
It's the minister's, is that correct, Mr. Gentleman?
It will be the minister's decision, and the minister's office has also attended what we call the Environment Planning Forum, which is a session that I chair.
Will that be taking lead over the holiday period? So he won't be available, he'll be on holiday.
So I was answering the question. So can I answer each question?
Yeah.
And then once I've answered it, I'm happy to take the next question. But if I get questions within the question, it's just a bit challenging for me to answer. But more than happy to take the next question. So as I said, going back to the first question, we have explored this with the Environment Planning Forum, which includes the community councils. We have received that feedback. The Minister's office has heard that feedback, but ultimately it will be a decision for the Minister and the government in terms of whether or not that timeframe is extended. But that message has been heard, but as I said, it's a matter for the Minister.
He's a public servant. He should work to the people's time.
So the next question that I think you asked me was whether he's taken leave. I mean, I don't think it's any secret that the Minister is also the Minister for Emergency Services and he tends not to take leave over the Christmas New Year period because it's summer. So that's something that he's quite open about. The other question was in relation to the Transact work. So I can assure you that zoning is staying. We did look at a range of options in relation to how flexible we could make the system. We looked at jurisdictions in the US, in the UK, across Europe, within Australia, and in the UK they certainly have gone to the step of having no zoning. We considered that and felt as though that was a step too far. We have maintained zoning, that's why you see in the structure that is there. The Transact work I might ask Dr. Brady to talk to, but really that is just trying to provide, from a theoretical sense, how cities, in terms of going from your residential zones, how you start to transition into essentially your town centres. It's not about removing zoning, it is showing, in fact, zoning achieves exactly that.
But it's quite clear, we've actually got a comparison table. You clearly state in the documents, you're moving to urban character, which is the Transact. I'll pick the extract, right? And I'll distribute to it here. That's very clear in the documents, that's where you're put it.
There is a table in there, but Dr. Brady may wish to talk to this, but as I recall from the table, it's a little bit of time since I've looked at it, it was trying to show you how our current zoning aligns to that Transact work, which was about,
it clearly states
I'm making a public statement now that the government has made the decision to keep zoning. That was a step that it did not want to take, and the Transact work is to show you how the existing zoning can relate to that concept of moving from low scale through to high
So will
density.
you be withdrawing the documents and making those changes to say that the Transacts are out?
Yeah, I don't think there's much more that I can say.
So you clearly stated that you're moving towards.
We have one question.
We have
at a time,
just
please.
one question, because there's a lot of people lining up. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for coming tonight. I just have a question around the housing design guidelines and the technical standards there. You mentioned that you've got some there, but can you explain a little bit more about what bushfire, what bushfire recommendations you've encompassed into those guidelines, if any, so far, or and also what industry experts you're consulting with around those guidelines?
Certainly. So in terms of the guidelines, I'm just trying to think. I do recall some.
We could go from district strategies through to...
Yeah, I might get you to...
So we might go at scale, maybe. So certainly from the district strategy level, with all those spatial layers of information, one of those is around bushfire. And so within our own directorate, we've got parks and conservation and environment, and so we've had them involved all the way through. So the bushfire mapping and the bushfire prone areas are all mapped. There are provisions that are picked up around bushfire requirements that again they work with us on. Then there are building requirements that kick into the building code, and that we work certainly with those colleagues again and with our colleagues at ESA when we get to that level. So that's where they are. But then in terms of the territory plan, so we've used the same provisions. They haven't disappeared from what exists currently in the territory plan to where they are in the current territory plan. In terms of where they're located in the current territory plan, I'm looking at my colleagues because they're better on the territory plan than I am.
I just think it might be something worth saying is that, particularly with this Western Edge exploration, it's a worthwhile investment for our future not to rush this. There's no immediacy, particularly considering as you're doing all this infill internally. You've got your light rail ambitions and so on. But for us out here in Weston Creek with that bushfire threat, there's a lot of developments in the housing space. I actually work with the Australian Industrial Hemp Association, which is now looking at, and other industry associations Australia-wide that are looking to build homes that are fire resistant, mold resistant. They are healthy homes that are investments for the future. They're an investment in people's health. I just think that you would be better off just not rushing to this, particularly as well knowing the community out here. 3 months is enough time to consult and go head on into something that's the spaces that we really value here. And I think that if you do take the extra time to consult and think a little bit wider about the environmental options that we have and the greener, some of the new technologies that are coming through, that you might get a really good result for generations to come. And that's all I've got to say about that.
So we'll note that, but I can assure you that in relation to the work we have done, this has not been rushed. We have been working and engaging with community for about 2 to 3 years in relation to this aspect of the work. We've also reviewed and considered feedback that we've been receiving for a couple of years prior to that. So it's been about a 5-year exercise.
It seems like a big rush to push and sell the land or push and promote development, but we actually have a resource problem.
I was going to finish answering.
Yeah.
But that's okay, mate.
No, it's okay.
If you don't want the answer, that's perfectly fine just to take the next one.
Got it.
No, that's perfectly fine. But I'm more than happy. I can just say we are absolutely happy to answer questions, but it does make it a bit challenging for us if we can't get the answer out before we get the next statement.
Okay.
Happy to take another question after we answer the question.
Could I meet with you perhaps at another time to explain to you further the opportunities of fire-resistant housing that might be useful in this area?
And look, I sit on the Australian Building Codes Board, so I'm certainly familiar with both condensation, all of those sorts of things. So I'm absolutely familiar with the work that's happening in this space. But I'd suggest that you attend one of those sessions with the Minister for Board if you want to get into that detail.
Ben, thanks for the opportunity to ask the moment. Look, Ben, my name is Bill Sullivan. You must understand that this is quite intimidating for a lot of people who have lived here for a long time. And all of a sudden, I know you've been working on this for a long time, I can see that. There's a lot of detail. It's great to have a presentation, but this is a long process that you've been involved in. And just to say that, you know, that we want to consult with people about pop-up centres, we'll make presentations, we'll have a workshop. I mean, it's fairly meaningless. The people I lead, the thing that hits me in the face is when I look at that map, you know, you've got your colour coding. One of the colours, I live in Stapleton Street, we've been fairly involved, you know, some of the people out our way, involved over about a 3-year period in the public housing development opposite where we live. Now we got notification of that by a government flyer on the letterbox which said this is happening. We took the initiative to actually engage with the government. We came up with a very constructive, I think, consultation process. We developed some good relationships with the government people and with the community, and we sort of extend that to Housing ACT. They approached us, so that we got a good outcome all round for the three parties, the government, the existing residents and the new residents. Now we've got 3 years of our lives into that, and there was a lot of work. Now this one's come up. I look at that and I see an orange coded area directly opposite. It might even have my block on it, but it's directly opposite in Stapleton Street, which is a narrow street, which has the entrance to the public housing development. And obviously, you know, you're going to have a negative reaction. It's the first I've heard of this, the first I've seen it. But you know, people, we can have these discussions and hear about it, and it's great. And I know that's your job, you've done a lot of work, and I know you've got very good intent. But for people like us, who are sitting there, you know, living our daily lives in retirement, I haven't got time to sit down and devote another 3 years or whatever it takes to, you know, go through this sort of process. What I want to know is what does that actually mean in terms of, you know, is there a potential for there to be a 6-storey development on my corner opposite the entrance to the public housing development? And if there is, what's the process? And what's the intended time frame?
Yeah, sure. And again, Dr. Wadey,
very basic question.
Yeah, no, I understand. And that's something that we probably should have emphasised at the beginning. In relation to this work, so this is the district strategies, it's a further level of detail from the Metropolitan ACT planning strategy, so it is going to the next level. But what we've included is, for some of those sites, and I think it's certainly covered by the one that you're referring to, and I'll come back to that, is more work needs to be done. So you talk about orange, is that the house?
The orange one says up to 6-storey development on that corner, corner where I live. You won't see them there, but I think you probably
No, I think I can. It's
on the neighbourhood sustainability district map.
Yeah.
Probably doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever.
What I would suggest, if you are able to attend those pop-ups or the detailed workshop, and we'll have the planners available there who've worked on this, and they'll have more detailed maps, and they can go through all that with you. And they can also explain to you what further work needs to be done and what the further opportunities are for engagement. So with much of this work, particularly where we've got the potential and possible, proposed possible potential sites, we haven't done enough planning there. So that's actually an area that we really value feedback, where you look at those sites and say, you know, it's not worth investing the time and the energy to do the further work for all of these reasons. What we're saying is a first pass, there's probably potential there, but we haven't done the work. Whereas the proposed sites, we've done all of the work. We've done the bushfire analysis, we've done the soil analysis, we've done the transport, the servicing. So we know that those sites are suitable. The one that you're talking about is, I think, either possible or potential, but I can't see.
There is the potential, obviously.
I think it'd be good if at the pop-up or the workshop, and we can go through the detail with you, because as Ben said, whether they're proposed, possible, proposed, potential, there are different levels of detail that we've got. But these are, you know, a lot of the things that we've got in here, that's what we want to hear back from people.
Sure. Look, I don't know what's driving, I think I know what's driving, but I know you come from the environment development, directorate, and that's your job. But there is a potential, obviously, for great deal of conflict with the community in this sort of stuff. We fought our little battles out there to maintain or develop our community the way we want to, and this is very threatening for a lot of people, as you would understand. So.
And if I can reassure you, we don't want it to be threatening. We absolutely genuinely say to you that we want to hear what you've got to say. We will be feeding that back through to government, and there will be further opportunities. So particularly for many of these sites, it identifies the further work that needs to be done. And this is not a case of if this is passing its current form, that's it. All those areas are going to be developed, more work needs to be done. And it's the scale of that further work that needs to be done. But I think for that particular example, because I don't have the detail now, if you go to one of those pop-ups, we'll have the planners who have worked on that. They'll take you through the thinking. That will then potentially help inform you to make a submission about why you think it might be a good idea or not.
Ben, as I said a moment ago, honestly, I am very interested in this stuff. I've been here for a long time. I want to spend the rest of my life engaged in writing submissions and all that sort of stuff. I've done that a number of times. I do other things.
Sure. What I can say is, what I would implore, I understand.
Serious concern.
I would be saying to you, if you have an interest, it doesn't need to be a 20-page submission. It can be a half a page in terms of what worries you, what concerns you. That's all it needs to be. In fact, online, what we've got is the big comments section. So you can just write one line about what you like, what you don't like.
Right.
That will be given just as much weight as the 20-page submission.
Okay.
So you don't have to put a lot of time, just tell us what worries you.
Thank you.
And I might just say, you can actually ask those questions now. So you're saying as a function, if you want to ask a question in relation to that specific site, we can pass it straight on to the team who's been working on it. They can have an answer for you.
Yep.
Try and put a bit of an ad in here. Also send them to the Community Council because we're putting a submission in. And it gets a bit hard trying to fill out 20 pages, so the contributions help us know it. Andrew, return, I think.
Is there any online questions or?
I saw one which I'll get to after.
It's my name, I'm a whole resident. Just going to pick out one on the side. First thing then is that I've been coming to these meetings for a long time. This is the first I've seen this. So if there was a consultation, you didn't choose it. And no one from your team was being involved. So that's just important. I think, as someone said over there, next Monday, that's really disobedience. Consultation, I know that you're doing what your political masters are saying. The feedback back to them, there's a few MLAs in the room here. That's not good enough for the size and the scale of the change. Particularly given this is the first one I've heard about. This is the first one. No talking points you've been prepared to say that you've been doing this for 3 or 4 years. It's going to wash, right? This is the first one. What I've seen when I read the district strategy is very, very poor. It doesn't say anything about the bushfire. It doesn't actually even trickle down into the rest of it. There's no mapping of the bushfire zones. There's a whole of ACT map. It doesn't come down to that level. When you look at Holder, there's no 6-story allowance at the moment. 10 hectares of investigation is what you guys have dabbled on. That's, and you're giving us 1 day to have a conversation about it. No. Second thing, why is there no urban heat map in there? It says all this stuff about climate change. There is not one map of urban heat that I saw in it of what's going on now and what's going to happen in 2040 and 2060 based on what's going on. Nothing.
Okay, I'll take the last one because it was a question. When I said that there are all different layers of mapping that we've done, we haven't put every single map or layer in here. We've put a combined mapping of that. So usually what we'll do is all that layering of the maps, and then we'll go through and we'll identify where there are some constraints, opportunities for where there might be change. So that takes into account bushfire. We have done heat mapping. Living infrastructure is a big thing that Minister Vassarotti champions that. So we have looked at that in terms of coming up with the identification of areas where we think there is some potential for change. So we haven't put every single bit of work that we have done in there, but we've tried to represent it.
That would help the credibility of it. You're talking to a fairly well-educated community. If you've got modelling, put it somewhere on the campus. Put it in an attachment that we can look at, so we can see what's going on, so we can see what you predicted that urban thing is going to look like. Right now, in 20 years' time with that, no change scenarios, 40 years' time, no change scenarios, and then what we want to do. And then tell us what the mortality differences are going to be with your intensive urban infill that you want to do. And show us that there's no change. There's no change. That's what I saw. I saw a map that's just going to blob a lot more people in, blob a lot more heat in, that stuff in Appendix A or B seems to ignore Centre for Research, the climate change research on urban design. It doesn't come up with very much of that stuff at all. Maybe it's there, maybe you pick and choose, cherry pick the bits that you like and you drop the rest. I can't see any of your assumptions. We can't support your strategy at the moment. It's just not good enough.
So I would suggest, no, that's not a question, I would suggest that perhaps at either in a submission or in comments, that you suggest perhaps more information on some levels of the information could be useful. Just to go to a point before, the pop-up and the workshop before the end of the year, that's one of the consultations, and as Matt went through that sort of squiggly diagram that showed at the moment we're sharing information and we're trying to help you understand the information. Then in late January, we will do further engagement with you. So we're trying to help you understand what all of this is about, give you some time to look at it and think about it, and then we'll do some more engagement in late January, early February. So we'll try to answer what we can over the next month or so, but there is another opportunity for engagement. So some of the questions that we've been getting in the meetings that we've been going to and some of the comments, that's what we are taking account of to think of, okay, what might be the best way for us to engage then in late January, early February with people. So it's useful to hear all this feedback because that can help us work out what might be the best way to engage a bit further down the track in that next stage of engagement.
Hi there, my name is Liam. Thanks for coming and speaking to us tonight. My question relates to housing supply and housing affordability. As I'm sure as everyone knows here, Canberra is a very rapidly growing city, and the population growth affects the affordability and cost of housing in Canberra. I guess in my view, I would say that the planning system to date has not done a good job in providing new housing for people to live in. You speak to people out there in the community, renters, people who buy housing, so it's really, really dire out there. We have a rental crisis, and that's, it's really dramatically affecting people's lives that they can't afford a place to live in the city. I think the planning bill speaks a lot, the planning strategy speaks a lot to good urban design and sustainability, but my concern is that it doesn't get the basics right, which is that people need places to live, and the planning system should support bringing new supply to do that. I've had a look at the population forecasts in the Weston Creek strategy, and the forecast of population growth is much lower than has been experienced in Canberra in the past. My concern is that this strategy is setting Canberra up for more failure when it comes to the cost of housing and the affordability of housing. So my question is, is this strategy good enough to support housing supply? And I suggest that it's not.
Okay, so I did mention earlier about population projections. So we did population projections, and then from that housing potential housing need into the future. As I said, the projections that we use, new data has come out, new census data has come out while we've been doing that. So we know we have to update it because the growth scenario that we put in there, we know is a bit lower than what has actually happened, because when the new census data came through, it did show that Canberra had actually grown more than what was projected or what was documented through COVID. It was thought to be a lot slower. So we know we've got to update that. What we've also done then is we've used some of the population projections for districts, and we've given an estimate of what a growth scenario might be for that district based on sort of current trends. But then what we're also trying to suggest, which goes to your question about supply of housing, is the areas that I mentioned but that are yellow. So if I just digress for a sec, we also did some, I'll just keep going. We did some work on housing choice a couple of years ago, where we did a lot of consultation and work with community and had a panel to find out what was it that people wanted in Canberra into the future. And that's when we found out people wanted a lot more of the missing middle, of the townhouses, and that people were prepared in certain areas that the character of an area might need to change from just single dwellings to have townhouses. So we've tried to carefully look, where do we think those opportunities might exist to give a bit more of that choice? Yes, there are some areas around centres where maybe apartments could occur, and in local centres it's probably 3-4 story apartments. But we've also looked, where are there opportunities for townhouses? So yes, you might think that the growth scenario we've put in there for Western District is low. So more than welcome to hear if you think there are other opportunities, or we've gone a bit too gentle and light in certain areas. By all means, let us know. But we hear exactly the opposite from people as well. So we're trying to manage that, and that's why the whole process was about trying to work out what are some important valued areas and things that we need to really look after, but where can we provide for growth and change that we think will provide what people need in the future.
Great, thanks very much. You've heard it from me. I think we should have more growth.
Okay.
Before you go, Brad, I'm going to ask you a quick question, and then you're getting one quick question. What's troubling me through all this is we don't appear to have any sort of a population demographer or actuary. We're relying on a snapshot out of the census. But are we actually projecting outwards, and what assumptions are we using?
Yes, we are. So we work in the ACT government. A lot of the population projections are driven out of an area in the central agency. So we work with them on the projections. They also take account of census data when it comes in. We've also done some projections ourselves for this work, so we've worked together for that, and that's where we've all decided actually the data that we were using for the initial projections, we need to update them.
Yeah, I assume that's the magic 26,000 answer. We're missing 26,000 people. That's a comment.
Yeah.
Brad,
no,
we
have
one question. You're not the microphone.
No, what about the online question?
I'll get to that.
Just about transparency in the availability of the maps. So you're saying that people can come along to these drop-ins and actually get the detailed maps. Could you actually put those maps up, those layers on that pack item? Because that would give us all access to the information that you have. You're making decisions for us on. That would be something you could do this week. You could actually
some of that information is already on that map.
On that map, but your actual layers. So the layers which indicate where all the infill's going to happen, the layers that are going to indicate all the changes in the heat map. The heat is very important. On a 32-degree day, black bitumen is to 74 degrees.
We're also responsible for climate policy, so
so we need the information you have. We don't want to hop along to a session where we can be drip fed. And just on population growth, we had 12,000 empty homes on census night. The RBA has consistently said we do not have a supply issue in this country. We have an affordability issue, and that's been driven by cheap credit and $20 billion of taxpayer spent on funding.
Val, a quick question, and then we'll draw a line under it, I think.
I felt like a long-term resident of Weston Creek, or Weston. Just more of a comment actually. 4 years ago we did a lot of letterbox drops and surveys regarding the DA that's happening in Weston. And quite a few young families, and one young lady especially said she bought an older house for a backyard and greenery for her children. So it concerns me about where all these projections are coming from, whether you actually go out and speak to the people who actually buy this, because now it's becoming a younger generation in Western Creek.
Thank you, Val. And thank you, the three of you. Very enjoyable. We'll be back on Monday for 3 sessions. I'll be putting them out on our website and Facebook tomorrow morning. I didn't put them out before then because I want people to come here and tune in. A little about the bush, and I think people need to engage with this because it is your future, and really it's our greatest natural resource, the land.
Thank you. If I can just conclude by saying that we're here because we do want to hear from the community. So, as Erin said, this is about information sharing. We also want to make sure that people have the ability to understand the material. We know that a lot of people won't engage in the planning system very often, and this is a big piece of work that was made earlier. And that's why we did structure it in this way, that we get out there, we share information, we hear some of the concerns that come earlier about availability of information. That will help us with the next phase of the engagement activities. So this is really important to us. We're not wanting to stand here and argue matters. If you have a strong view about something, we do want to hear it because that will then help us advise government and make recommendations to government. We have been working on this for quite some time, and sometimes you do need those extra sets of fresh eyes, and I've made it really clear for many, many years that you know your local community better than anyone, and that's why we want to hear from you. So some of the comments we've heard tonight, great comments. Make sure that you, even if it is just that 1 or 2 lines, make sure you let us know, because that will then help to influence the final outcome. This is, again, I've described this in other sessions as a respectable product, but it's by no means final, and that was intentional. So we know there are going to be gaps, and we need to hear from you in relation to what those gaps are, whether it be in relation to projections or anything else.
Thank you. Can I ask planning people, is there anything in this new plan that's going to do anything to make the physical environment more accessible for people with disabilities?
Short answer is yes. So I do recall, and I can't point to the exact provisions, but in the design guides, both in terms of the housing design guides, but also particularly the urban design guides, there are elements around accessibility. Because as I said earlier, one of the key parts of what we're trying to achieve here is getting people to think about not just the building, but the spaces that are left behind and how they can move around the building. So that's the long version of the short yes.
I'll add there that in the legislation, in the bill that's before the Assembly at the moment, Council has lodged a submission and it's very clearly articulated there with the human impacts need to be considered as part of the bill. So watch the Assembly online next Tuesday. Tuesday, will be appearing and we'll certainly be emphasising that point. So we've heard you. Thank you very much. tell us about Western Edge. And she's accompanied by her sidekicks here, Rebecca Bassarotti and Joe Clay. And they've got a presentation I've seen, and I'm looking forward to it now.
Thank you. Okay, so I know you've all met me once or twice before. We've been having some great conversations here over the years about planning, but I know that Rebecca and Joe are much better at talking about this than I am, and that's because they do this all day, every day as part of their job. So Rebecca was elected at the end of 2020 and is now our Minister for Environment, but she's also Minister responsible for heritage. And so, you know, balancing those things is pretty important when we're thinking about the future of our city and our natural heritage as well as our built heritage. Joe is our ACT Greens spokesperson for planning, transport and parks and conservation. And so she's actually looking at a lot of these same sorts of issues, but from a different perspective. Between the two of them, they've both got a whole lot of different tools in their toolkit for addressing how do we think through these complex problems and how can we talk this through as a community. So I thought the best thing to do is to get the two experts in the ACT Greens to come and talk through with us what Western Edge development might mean for us and what kind of things we need to think through. So take it away.
All right, it's lovely to be here. It's nice to see lots of friendly faces and some new faces as well. As Emma said, both Joe and I, we are not the planning minister. And certainly some of these issues do sit in the planning portfolio. But this is a particular area that we are really interested in, particularly from a Greens perspective. This is an issue that we've been engaging in really closely. So certainly from my perspective, in terms of particularly as Minister for Environment and really recognising some of the key environmental values in this area, I have a particular interest in this area. We've been following it and sort of engaging really closely. But Joe,
You want to start?
Yuma. So I thought I'd do a very quick spiel, and Emma's done a marvellous job of introducing us. Rebecca and I were both elected in 2020, so we're fairly new politicians. Emma's explained our different roles. So I also chair the planning committee, so I'm involved in scrutinising some of the planning stuff that's going through at the moment. And we are working together on a lot of our planning and development and environmental protection issues and using different tools as we go.
all right, I think this is easy. So I think as some people have mentioned in the previous conversation, that certainly when we're engaging on this issue and all issues, and particular with my responsibilities in terms of the environment portfolio, I am really conscious that we are dealing with some really significant existential risks. That people would have read the most recent State of the Environment report, the Australian State of the Environment report, which actually outlines how significant our environment has been degraded nationally, and that plays out at a local level, that we have very little environment to trade off, frankly. We know that we are in the midst of an extinction crisis. We are working really hard locally to protect some of our local threatened species, and we're also working to ensure that we keep our common species common. But this is an everyday issue for us. We know the significance of habitat loss. We are really lucky that we have beautiful habitat in the ACT in terms of our woodlands and our grasslands. We have some of the most intact ecological communities in Australia. I think we've got less than 1% across Australia, and we've got the most of it. So these are really special environments that we are custodians, not just for our local community, but for the Australian community and the species that inhabit them. But we've also touched on the fact that we have a housing crisis. We certainly have a housing affordability crisis, And we are actually one of the largest growing areas in the country. We know, I think Gungahlin, for instance, has been the largest growing part of area in Australia. And so I think all of us, whether it's our children or it's our parents, we are really thinking about what we do in terms of, how we have homes, and certainly from a Greens perspective, we are unashamedly ambitious about how we ensure that we do provide a decent home for all. It's not something that we've solved yet, but certainly we are really focused on what we do around that, particularly for people at the lower end of the market. And so we've got a whole lot of competing pressures, and we've got a whole lot of pressures that are happening at the same time. And our perspective from the ACT Greens is that we can't trade off one crisis by trying to solve another crisis. So when we're looking at the issue of housing affordability, we can't actually say, okay, we'll put aside the extinction crisis, we'll put aside the habitat loss crisis, we'll put aside the climate crisis. These are issues that we need to look together. So that sort of really frames how we're engaging with all of these issues.
So, in terms of who's doing what in planning and development, we've actually just had a great presentation from EPSDD. So I think hopefully that's given people an introduction about some of the planning review and development that's going on. We're just really talking about the Western Edge, which isn't part of that planning review. But the Minister for Planning and the Minister for Parks and Conservation is Minister Gentleman. The Planning Minister has announced a few times now that he's expecting the planning review that he's conducting at the moment to be in place in the middle of next year. And we are running at the moment an inquiry in Parliament about one part of that, the planning bill, and they've just started government consultation on the district strategies. That's what EPSDD and Ben Ponton and Erin were talking about before. And the consultation on that is running at the same time. So there's quite a lot going on in this space of planning and development, and we're just trying to make sure we keep an eye on the Western Edge while all of that other conversation is going on.
Probably just one little thing to note in terms of the planning bill and the planning inquiry. As people know, we've got an interesting scenario in terms that we have non-executive members as well as executive members, and three of us, Emma and I included, we sit in Cabinet. So in relation to the planning bill, we have been engaging really strongly on the planning bill. When it came to the point of a draft that was going to be presented to the Assembly, Emma, myself and Shane actually decided to step outside of Cabinet because we were not happy with where the bill was, and we wanted to signal our intention that we think that it needed a significant amount of work. And so certainly, the work that the committee is doing through the inquiry is really important for us. So I just think it's useful that we flag that, and that we flag that intention with our government partners. So, I think probably a lot of people in this room know a lot more about the Western Edge than probably we do. I have to say, I am not a planning expert, and so I have been on a crash course for the last 2 years in terms of how the planning system works, and also working out, the environmental levers and how it fits into the planning system. But the Western Edge is really, it's that orange blob. And so quite a while ago, that was identified as an investigation area. So saying, well, if we wanted to move into more greenfields development, this is potentially an area to look at. And so there has been, it was identified through the planning strategies as an area to look at. So it's the 9,800 hectares that borders on the Murrumbidgee River, Weston Creek, Molonglo and Belconnen. And as we know, that's the orange thatched area.
So there's been a number of investigations conducted so far. I've listed those, I'm not going to read them all out. But basically there's been contamination investigations, there's been some environmental assessments, there's been a preliminary bushfire risk assessment, and some cultural heritage assessments. It's very much a work in progress. There's a lot of investigations that need to happen in that area. There is an immense amount of pressure at the moment coming from the Assembly and various parts of the community to build and develop very quickly. We are being very, very careful in the Greens to continually say that there's a lot of investigatory work that needs to happen in this area. We know there's a lot of high values, ecological plants and wildlife. There's a whole lot of really endangered species in there. We know that it's bushfire prone. We know that this is an area you need to take care in. So we are making sure that investigations are being done carefully, that they are being done thoroughly, that they are being done in the right sequence. So it's a long process. I think there's no quick answers on that.
I think, as Joe mentioned, the investigations are complete. So this sort of strategic planning process takes a long time. I don't know about you, I get really frustrated by that, because particularly when we know in some areas, and we'll get to it in a minute, we know that there are really significant environmental values in some of this area. So, but you know, the advice that we're given is, in terms of this work happening, it's going to take about 17 years. So this is not something that we're going to look at in a couple of years and see development happening. And this is if urban development is proposed at the Western Edge, it's probably about 10 years away from that decision. But that's an if, because these decisions haven't happened yet.
So we're also watching pretty carefully what's happening on the Western Edge right this second. There's a question. Should we come to questions at the end? Yeah, great. We'll come to questions at the end. We're watching really carefully in the Greens what's happening right now to make sure that decisions don't get taken while investigations are happening that can't be reversed. And if you see things or if you're concerned about things, that is really great information. Get in touch with me and tell me, and we'll follow up. We'll ask some questions in Parliament and we'll track it. What we've seen, there have been 10 blocks sold in the past 5 years. There are no blocks currently on the market. This is a parliamentary question I'm running pretty frequently at the moment, just to keep an eye on what's happening. We have asked quite a few times whether there'll be a strategic environmental assessment or whether one has been done. That's a decision that hasn't yet been taken. It's from my point of view, something that's probably quite useful, but we're not there yet. I've had some good conversations. Some of the blocks in this area are privately owned. Now, those blocks that are privately owned, somebody can develop that in the way that that block is currently zoned for. So, and it's quite difficult. You've got to unpick a lot of detail. So sometimes we get a report coming through saying, oh my goodness, something is happening in the Western Edge. And when we track that down, it turns out that somebody is putting up a shed on their private block, and that is not something, until the whole process has been finished, that will keep happening. But I would encourage you, if there's something that concerns you, by all means, get in touch with the Planning Minister, and or if you don't like that answer, get in touch with me and we'll track it down. So there will be no zoning changes, and there shouldn't be any major changes happening until the entire process has happened. The other one I'm the member for Ginninderra, we're watching quite closely in Belconnen, the CSG Parkwood site, because that's also in the same sort of area. And it's a facility that we need, but we also need to make sure that it is done environmentally sensitive in the way that it happens.
It's interesting to see around the EPPC Act that if there's a referral, it will go into the Act. It will be under the terms of the Act. Now there is a concern in relation to that in terms of work that has been done around the EPPC Act. A review was done quite a while ago by Graham Samuel that actually identified that there were significant flaws in the National Environment Protection Laws, particularly that Act. So one of the things that I want to say that I am doing is that I'm really working hard through national environment ministers to ensure that we see significant improvements to that Act, and we don't just stand and let our national environment protection laws, which a whole lot of other jurisdictional laws are dependent on, particularly through things like this, that is strengthened. So we didn't get any movement on that in the last with the last coalition government. We are expecting almost any day now an actual response to that review by the new Labor government. But that is work that needs to be done, that we are working really hard on, because a lot of these things work in parallel. But in terms of, some of the, one of the reasons that we are so focused on the Western Edge is that we know that there are significant environmental values. So we know that that there are areas, and we'll come to Blewett's Block in a minute, in terms of there's really significant importance in terms of connectivity. So it's not just, we've been thinking for a long time about special parts of remnant bushland, our special patches that have special ecological communities. We're really pushing hard to think much more about connectivity. One of the things that I am excited about when I look at the district plans, and this is work that we have worked hard to ensure, we embedded ecologists into the planning team that were doing that mapping work, and that's why we've got the blue-green corridors. There's still more work to be done in that area, but we're really pushing the planners to think not just about the special pieces of green, but about how they all match each other, how they support species moving through, how they deal with issues such as heat islands and the effect throughout the open space. We've talked about threatened species, not just the nationally threatened species, but what are really important and endemic in our local environment that we need to protect. I think I talked a little bit before about how we ensure we keep our common species common. We don't want to be working that we just keep putting more species on the threatened species list and have to work really hard. We want to keep our common species common, particularly important in the context of a bush capital. And we are really conscious that the way it works currently, that we're not seeing the cumulative impact of particular developments, and as well the issues around sprawl. And that will come to one of the really difficult conversations that we want to have, or that we need to have as a community. This whole issue of, if we keep going to into green fields, we are losing patches that we probably can't afford to lose, but we're a growing city. So this issue of compact city and just diversification, this is a tricky conversation that we have to have as a community.
I get the easy slide. There's a couple of things that are off the table. Central Molonglo is not being considered for potential urban development, so that's an easy one to deal with. Excellent. Lewis.
All right. So I just wanted to touch particularly on Blewett's Block, because I'm not sure about you, but I know that it's a pretty special part of the world, and we've been really explicit, and we do, from the election campaign about how special we think Blewett's Block is. There is incredible work that's happened from citizen science around Blewett's Block. One of our challenges is that the formal science is now only just catching up with the incredible work that citizen science has done. And so that means it's taking a little bit of time to translate formal protection around an area that we know needs to be protected. And we said it in the election, I'll say it every day of the week, that there is a significant environmental values in Blewett's Block that we need to work hard to protect. But we also know it's not just about Blewett's Block. And this is part of this challenge with the strategic planning process, that we don't want to put all of our effort into one special block and actually miss the next one that's down the track. So we want to work really hard within the current planning processes that are happening to ensure that we protect the connectivity corridors that we know are contained in that area. The other thing that I just wanted to note is that there's also really great complementary work that's going on at the moment. Don't know if anyone saw quite recently, we've just done a small mammal survey The information about that is on the environment website. And we've actually discovered common dunnarts. They're not so common, they're actually pretty adorable and cute. We didn't know that they were in this area, and we've actually discovered that they're in this area. So this has triggered more investigation about what we need to do in terms of protecting species like that. So this is actually really positive, exciting work.
So we're also in the Greens looking at what we do if we don't, for instance, continually sprawl further and further out of Canberra and build in new greenfields areas like the Western Edge, particularly the Western Edge. And there's quite a lot of ways that we can do that, and I think probably we've already had a bit of a conversation with EPSDD about that. That's where your densification of city planning really comes in. As Canberra still has the biggest houses and the smallest families on average, and obviously we need a whole range of different houses. We've got some people with a lot of kids, we've got some big families here, but that's actually not the norm anymore. We've got a lot of people who want gardens, and we have a lot of big quarter-acre blocks with gardens, so that's great. But actually, we've got a lot of people who don't necessarily want gardens. We've got a lot of people at different stages of life. A lot of the young people these days don't want to mow a lawn. It's quite interesting. A lot of people are downsizing. They maybe don't want a big garden. So we actually need a whole range. And the one thing we do know that's quite clear is we have really, really big homes, and we cover a really, really wide urban footprint for the number of people that we have here, and it's not going to be sustainable. We've had policies for densification and compact living for a long time. Because I'm a new politician, I'm not very interested in government policies. I'm more interested in other things. I'm a climate change person. I'm fascinated. The IPCC, the panel that's looking at climate change, they're actually getting more and more specific in their recommendations as they release more and more climate change reports. And they're telling us very strongly now, they used to do these top-level scientific recommendations, and now they're coming down into urban planning and they're saying, by the way, you need to put houses in your urban transport corridors right next to public transport so people don't need to drive every single place that they need to go. And by the way, you need to densify your cities. They're getting quite specific. So there's a lot of that. Should we do questions at the end? Yeah, we'll get there.
All right, we're going to really skip through really quickly. So we sort of, we just thought that it was useful to look at, what's actually in the pipeline. And, the district strategies actually go into a little bit of that. But there's actually quite a bit of greenfields development that will happen that, is pretty well in the pipeline or pretty well developed. Some of it's got a little way to go. CSI Road in Adera, for instance, has got a little while to go, but there's, the work happening in Molonglo, in Derry. There's still work to be done in Gungahlin. In my North Western and North Lawson, and there's actually quite a lot of work that's happening in terms of infill. Joe comes from Belconnen, so there's a lot of densification happening there. In my part of town, the East Lake, the East Lake proposals is something that's being looked at. The Acton waterfront, the Northbourne corridor continues to be developed, and I see Fiona here, around some of the work that's happening in Woden, in the Woden area as well.
And we're nearly at the end, so nearly up to questions. I will be brief. I think probably everybody in this room's heard about the 70-30 split, which is the official government policy to keep 70% of our urban development within our existing footprint. The Greens actually have stronger environmental protection policies than that. We think it should be 80% within our existing urban footprint with a view to, at some point, no more urban sprawl. We think at some point we need to get out the pen and draw a line and say that's Canberra, and we don't bulldoze anywhere past that line. And we have a number of other environmental protection policies that are up there on that slide, but it is very, very late, so I think in the interest of skipping to questions, I won't read it out for you. Oh, and this is just some big questions we've put up, but I think probably your questions will be more interesting. It's basically, where do we put our people and how do we protect our environment at the same time?
Well, I know have this theory about urban infill and densification and stopping urban sprawl, but in jurisdictions where that actually has happened, they actually have urban growth boundaries, where they actually say no more development outside here. At the moment, what we're getting is urban infill and urban sprawl, and urban sprawl the worst type. So if you look at Casey, there is not a single green dot when you look down on Casey. It's all really narrow houses, crammed together. It's like something in the 1930s. I've got history there. But, so, are you going to push the government to put an urban growth boundary? Because Mr. Barr is saying we're going to have urban infill, that's not urban sprawl, and it's not proposing an urban growth boundary.
Look, it's a really interesting question, and if you look at that that other slide, there's absolutely greenfield development that is occurring. We are very interested to see how the Western Edge development can stack up once you actually protect some of the environmental corridors. What I would say though, in answer to your question, I think it's an ongoing conversation. In an 80-20 split, I think we're certainly saying that we're going to run it. We're just literally going to run our land anyway.
But it won't work without the boundary.
Yeah. I really hear your comment. I just wanted to talk about that issue around how we do our development and sort of pick up on the issue that Joe talked about in terms of the size of our buildings and how we build them. That I know that a number of people have been quite involved. We did a lot of work around what was called the livability variation, the variation 369, which for the first, there was a few things that did. One in terms of ensuring surface permeability, one around canopy, but really importantly about limiting the size of property on a block, so you had to have private urban space. It's those kind of policies that are really going to be important in terms of heat island and in terms of ensuring that we have living infrastructure. That's one on private space. I think I'm actually quite excited about some of the things like the design guidelines, because I think that will really push us to be engaging deeply in these issues.
I totally agree that we need to ensure that we have enough green spaces around our homes and places to plant trees and all those sorts of things. We actually have a winning formula with the garden city suburbs in the inner south, Weston Creek, Tuggeranong. Why aren't we just sticking with that?
Well, because I think what people are looking for is actually changing. They're not looking to, like a lot of people are not looking to look on a quarter-acre block. I had my kids.
11% of Australians want to live in apartments.
Yeah, but I think we're talking about lots of different forms, and that form changes over time. I live in a house. I've got kids. I live in a house. My kids are getting a little bit older. I'm going. This house is not working for us anymore. We want we're actually looking for the townhouse option. I want an option where I can actually support my dad. I'm thinking about my kids and my dad. So I think we're looking at different options throughout the line.
Bought their homes with gardens to retire in.
Brad, I'm going to ask you to pick up the
A simple question. Mark West, I live in Weston. In the Greens policy, you've talked a lot about space for people to live, we talk about energy and all that. What about food?
Food. I love talking about food. That as part of my environment portfolio, I've also got agriculture, and so we are in fact right now developing our first agriculture policy in 20 years, which is actually a food and fibre strategy. So I actually think I've come to speak to this group about the development of that. And so we've gone through a community conversation around the development of the strategy, got a fantastic response. We're in the process of developing a draft strategy. We'll have a draft strategy out early next year, which we will also be asking for comment on. That's going to look at, the ideas of food bowl, but also about how we promote urban agriculture, which I think is, something that there's lots of opportunities for. So completely passionate, watch this space. I'll come back and talk to you when we've got our draft strategy.
We did lodge a submission, Mark, and I know you've read it.
I just forgot, it was a while ago.
Hi, you know that I appeared before the inquiry on the Urban Forest Bill, and I've seen the report, and one of the things I mentioned in the public hearings was that, given that there's and you've reiterated it again tonight, the importance of urban infill. But I think and you said you don't give up on the climate change objectives as you're trying to achieve that objective. Well, it seems to me that the urban forest bill that's going through the recommendations is going to entrench a lot of those problems, because my understanding was that, okay, we get urban infill, but we get protection of living infrastructure, you know, permeable soil, urban forest, and 30% urban tree canopy cover by 2045. Well, in the exposure draft of the urban forest bill, there was a target of 30% by 2045. And, you know, that was too far into the future. You could get rid of a lot of trees and then, you know, on the basis that maybe they'll come back at some point before 2045. So we were certainly, and I was certainly suggesting an interim target. So you can imagine my horror when I found that the draft that went to the Assembly for inquiry didn't have a target date at all in there. So in other words, you know, the Greens and Labor who, you know, if you look at other areas relating to climate change, both the ACT and federal governments have insisted on timeframes within which to achieve 100% renewable electricity. In the ACT was 2020. And 43% greenhouse gas emission reductions by 2030. And that was fought over for years. And that's Labor and the Greens have fought very hard for legislated targets. And so why is it that your committee, Joe, the planning committee, why is it that in your recommendations to the government, you have not asked them to have legislated targets for tree canopy cover? The only thing I can conclude is that you know that you're going to have to get rid of a lot of trees to supply urban infill, and you don't want to be held accountable by a target. Now that's the only conclusion I can draw. Can you please explain why you didn't put in anything about a legislated target?
Sure, I'm happy to explain. I'm afraid I'm not looking at the recommendations right now. From recollection, I think we had 17 of them, and you'll shake your head furiously when I say something that is not matching up with written. Excellent. Yep, 17 recommendations. We discussed this issue. There is a committees are tripartite committees. I'm not allowed to come out and tell you the contents of our deliberations. They are committee in confidence, and that is set up to make sure that a member of Liberals, a member of the Greens and a member of the Labor Party can have open conversations and then release our recommendations. So I can't tell you about the discussions, I can only tell you about the report and the recommendations. That we did get that piece of evidence from one witness, from you. We got a lot of pieces of evidence from a lot of different witnesses in that inquiry. We do have a recommendation in there asking government how they will ensure that we reach that 30% tree canopy target with this new scheme, how they will ensure that we do not lose it in the few suburbs that already have it, because there's a couple of areas that already have that 30%, not many, how we will retain that. And we've also put in a very strong recommendation that there be a 2-year review to see exactly how this new system, including the canopy fund, is working to ensure that it is achieving the goals. So I feel if you go through the body of those 17 recommendations, you'll probably see that there is genuinely engagement with the evidence that we heard, and that there is a genuine intention to make sure that that system is going to achieve its goals. I guess everybody will have different views about the best means of achieving that. The best thing I can say is that if there is a 2-year review, that is, there is mapping that is done, satellite mapping that is done, so that 2-year review will be genuine, it will be able to show you what's happening on the ground. I think that's probably the best way to see if it's working.
And I just want to, the urban forest bill primarily deals with trees on private land? Yeah. Okay, so I think...
It's both public and private land. So the
the
forest bill is about both. That's why it's different from the Tree Protection Act, because the Tree Protection Act is primarily...
So all I'm saying is that there's potential, like in terms of, there's absolutely a commitment, and you can see a funding commitment that is also following the commitments around the tree canopy. I think there's opportunities for us to look at where the, where the how a legislative target etc., could be looked at that are beyond, this act or another. So it's, we can continue to have that conversation.
Thanks for coming. This whole Western Edge thing, I think, one of these conversations will be next year. I was really looking forward to just being the entire thing, not the EPSDD guys getting in the way. But one of the frustrations I've got with the strategy that they don't actually mention that those targets, they sort of brushed over it, and they said, we're lucky in Chapman it's got 25% tree cover, but they didn't actually say anything about we need to actually get. They talk about all this new housing they want, and you guys talk about housing. They didn't talk about the fact that we actually also need a lot more canopy. We also need to change the thought process around the finishes of everything. The last time I was at one of these meetings, they want to bitumen the Stromlo car park, turn it into another heat line.
Yeah.
And when you sort of raise those sorts of things, it's just sort of pushed to the side. Like that's our money being invested in a new heat island, which is, and when you say, can we have some trees and a different thought process on the paving, it's just, that's not in their commercial interest.
Yeah.
Before I get to that, I was actually going to say, with some of the population points, what I'm seeing is Canberra is it's looking at itself as a little bubble, unfortunately, and it's great that we're doing all this planning, but we're actually, I think, in the same boat that South East Queensland and other large urban areas are, where we have to start thinking regional and start thinking, because, I don't think the Western area is actually where the development needs to go if we're going to populate. It's where people have to be close enough to jobs, to all the other things. Everyone goes east for a particular reason over Christmas break, but why aren't we also thinking about that going that way? Every time you ask the government about the future of Canberra, it's running away from New South Wales and the mountains rather than integrating with a broader area where exactly the same pressures are happening, exactly the same impacts on ecology are happening, but and they all come here to work, the people that work in Canberra also live outside of Canberra, but we don't seem to have any sort of regional plan or thought process going on for what that looks like. And that's everything. That's not just ecology, that's everything.
Before I hand over to Rebecca to answer the grown-up questions, we'd be happy to come back next year. We'd be happy to come back whenever we're needed, I think.
Yeah, look, I think it's a really good question, and I think this is what this is part of the challenge with our federation, hey? That we do things in quite a piecemeal way. There is work that does happen in the broader region, but we don't have the same. We often don't have the same level of influence, and there's also some real tension. So in terms of the the growth in our areas around us, one of the biggest issues, is water and access to water. And it's interesting also what's happening in Ginninderry, that we are seeing a cross-border development and sort of really trying to grapple with how we do that. We've got a perspective that we really should move the border because it doesn't really make sense to be doing it in that way, particularly when we will be required to provide the services for people across the border. These are really complex. These are really complex issues. I'm not involved in those conversations. I know that there is work that happens to sort of work with the other local councils. Unfortunately, though, there are decisions that are made by local councils that we are really concerned about because they do have an impact on our population and particularly on our catchment, on our ecological communities as well. Particularly as we know, a lot of our precious species then they don't stay on the border either. They go to the next beautiful patch too. So I think it's a fair point. There is work that happens, but there are some fundamental challenges about how we organise this country.
It's a massive gap.
Hi there. Thanks for coming along. I just wanted to raise a few questions. First of all, I wonder whether or not I would be seeing this strategy neighbourhoods. So there's over 6-story apartments that are selected for the boundary there that I saw in the district strategy. I also noticed that Orson's Grassland is zoned for development. Were you aware of that, Tony?
Yeah. So in terms of Yeah, look, I actually think I do think they're genuine.
Sorry, can I just clarify the question? I didn't hear it properly.
Oh, sorry. I was just pointing out, because we were discussing environmental protection in rural areas. I spent the last 3 years reading across disciplines about the complexity ideology.
Yeah.
It's actually new urbanism that came out of America in the late 70s. There is nowhere in the world where it's protected environmental areas. And the urban density is specific, its outcomes are specific to climate. So as you were saying, because we live in a water-limited climate, then what they're finding now in Adelaide, so Adelaide changed their urban forest bill just as we had about 10 years ago. I looked at that legislation because I thought it would be instructive to see, well, how many trees have they lost since they did that? And the estimation is 75,000 a year. And when they looked at the parts of the suburb that hadn't been densified, so the traditional kind of suburban, because it was originally a garden city, they found with their urban heat island maps that the traditional suburbs were cooler, as I believe our urban heat maps are found. In other words, the vegetation has to be around the homes if it's going to provide. So I think this is a big challenge. So I pick up that some of the visceral nature of the responses here are that perhaps a few people have looked at the detail on the district maps. And that detail is quite specific. So I was surprised about the responses from EPSDD. Was it Ben Ponton who perhaps responded? I was surprised that Ben would be not across that in the detail given his position of what I was thinking about that. Because they're very specific about the degree of intensity, and they're talking about 3-storey apartments just in normal suburbs, but also 6 stories and 6 stories above.
So is this in the areas of potential, that, the possible potential, the orange?
Traditional suburbs. They sit in my parents live in Aranda. I had a look at their district strategy in Common, and half of Aranda's gone. And there's a sort of a transport hub, so each of the urban infill objects, so there's 2 different transport hub objects, and respectively within each a 200 metre and 400 metre distance of those objects is the level of density that's specified. That they sort of explained on their slides, where they ditch the RZ1 and RZ2, and then you just wind up with 3-storey or 6-storey.
Yeah, look, and I think we're all coming to grips with the draft district plans. To be really honest, I find them really overwhelming. And I've had a chance to have a look at them for a little bit longer than you, but not a lot. But they are. It is overwhelming. To get through to the detail. Yeah, because
quite clear about.
Yeah, because my understanding is certainly in terms of the zoning, my understanding is how I've been briefed is the zoning is still intact. But they have identified areas where my understanding is they actually want to have a community they want to have the community discussion about Lawson Grassland. I'm going to go and have a look at that because that's really interesting because we would say absolutely don't even talk about it. Yeah, that's right.
But it just circled, we're talking about that. And what fascinated me just anecdotally about looking at those district strategies was that they were, first of all, they're graded JPEGs. So I asked EPSD if they would provide the digital files. And they told me they didn't have them. And I said, well, we both know that's not true. But you're just not releasing them to the community. And if not, why not? And then I didn't get an answer from the person. I got an answer from the whole team. Perhaps they had a whole plan to answer that email. They still didn't provide the digital files. I'll just say this, those maps are made up of streets where real people live, raising their families. And it was astonishing to me as a person in a democratic society to see maps with no streets, no notification to the people who live there, to engage them and say, well, we're going to rezone this, which means there'll be a knock on the door by a developer. So when they talk about outcomes-based planning, the question would be outcomes for whom, and it's, in my view, not the local community.
So my understanding around the district strategy is that I don't think that this is, I think this is the start of the conversation. This is a new thing. District plan, because normally, as I think they said before, you have the conversation about the territory plan, and then you have a fight about a block. And so, I think whether or not the execution, this is,
it's an overall, this new urbanism ideology, which is the planning that they're pursuing, it's a very specific ideology. Even the marketing strategies have been imported from elsewhere. So I can show you the same marketing that's shared with the community as part of having a say. The same thing's been shared in New Zealand.
Well, that doesn't surprise me that they'd be pulled, you know, like.
So I'm saying that it's not new, so they know exactly where this is going.
Although this is a new conversation, for us to be having a conversation at a district level, that is a new conversation.
But it is market-led planning, so we are looking to deregulate.
Alice, sorry.
No, I don't know.
We've got other people queued up. Thank you.
We'll specifically look at both of those.
I think we need to go for a return appearance because there's so many more questions we want to ask. I'll put mine in my back pocket because we're running out of time. So thank you very, very much. I'm sorry to have to draw a line under it. Edwin's been here patiently waiting to talk to us. You're right to
Sure. Hello everyone. Lovely to meet you tonight. My name is Evan Leifer. I'm the Deputy Convener of Greater Canberra, which is a community group focused on affordability, sustainability, livability in our city. I would like to start by paying respect to traditional owners of the land and paying the same respect to anyone here tonight who's Indigenous. I've come along tonight at Bill's request because we're trying to reach out to community councils because you might have seen us around. We're predominantly a group of young people, but we do have members from across the area who care about planning and particularly Canberra's housing crisis. So we want to make a more livable, sustainable and affordable Canberra. So who are we? Greater Canberra Community Council Group, which are committed to affordable, livable and sustainable city. Our members are a mix of renters and homeowners at multiple stages of their lives. The predominant number sit in that sort of 25 to 35 range, but we have members going from 16 to 80. We are a very broad group. We're non-partisan, we don't represent any political party. We have members from all political parties who are currently in the Assembly and otherwise in Canberra, but individually we're not a partisan organisation, but we have political positions. Here's a breakdown of, for example, our membership. A large chunk of renters, a large chunk are owner-occupied. You can see there that sort of big age, particularly the young people. So why do we exist?
Sorry, can you go back to that slide? We can't read the writing.
Oh yeah, sorry. So the yellow block there, that is renters. Okay. Orange is owner-occupied. And the other is, because on our membership survey, someone put they live with their mother, and someone said they're currently couch surfing. So that other sort of step is usually that area. It's not sort of like investors or anything like that to worry. And then just the other slide there is that first gap is 16 to 24-year-olds, and there's 25 to 39, I think, and then 40 to 45 and 65 plus. So while we predominantly put ourselves down as a young person organisation, largely trying to capture that sort of 16 to 30 age group, we have membership across the board, and we like to hear from our community. So what do we stand for? I think it's very simple. We want a city that's more sustainable, more affordable, and more livable. We want a city that plans not just for its current residents, but for those who don't yet have a voice who are coming. Whether that's the younger generation who are too young to vote, or to enter the housing market, or it's future Canberrans who might want to move here and live here and raise a family. It might be for our children in time when we have them. And we want a city that doesn't just build spaces where people live or people can work, but builds that third space where people can enjoy and be part of their city. There's a big area of planning which talks about the necessity of place building and building spaces that are those third places away from home where people can go, so they don't have to necessarily spend money or they don't have to consume something to be there. They can just be part of their city structure. And that's something that we think there's not a lot of in Canberra, and there could be a lot more. So that's something that we want to see changed. So why do we exist as an organisation? We feel, a lot of us, we formed out of what is known as the Manor House campaign, where in the inner south there was a fairly modest proposal for a 4-unit development, which had the same floor space as an RZ1 property, so your average detached home. But instead of that, if everything except its parking requirements is completely compliant with R01, but it faced quite a large local backlash. And now for my generation, particularly people who have organised Greater Canberra, that's the exact kind of typology we want to see to help us move into the housing market. And so we formed out of that. And we formed out of that particularly because as young people, renters, and often working Canberrans, we didn't feel well represented in discourse in our planning society, in sort of the way Canberra is talked about. So we went around and we formed so we could give that sort of group a voice. We also note that we have a lot of issues with the way the heritage system at the moment. And I know Minister Brasserotti's here, and you might be aware that there's a report that's just been released that says the heritage system isn't working. And we have a lot of opinions on it. For example, we query why, for example, the Canturf development on Fishwick is currently a heritage listed site, and why it remains a heritage site and what that actually benefits the community for. So we have a lot of questions about how our heritage system operates that don't seem to get asked. As I think many of the previous presenters of the Greens highlighted, we're concerned about the environmental impact of sprawl. As we go out, not only is it bad for the environment, but it increases commute times. It makes people spend more every day on their travel to work. It makes them have to travel by car to get anywhere, and it leads to a city that's less walkable, less livable, and just not as affordable because it's more expensive to build these new developments. But most importantly, Canberra's in a housing crisis, and it's a crisis that's quite pervasive. We have some of the highest average rents in the country and some of the highest median house prices. And that's factoring Sydney and Melbourne, we on average cost more. We worked the maths, we crunched the numbers, and we worked out that on average, your average Canberra business needs to pay someone $20,000 more than they do in Melbourne or Sydney in order to account for the housing costs that are here. So the biggest thing that we're trying to deal with is that housing crisis. So what is Canberra's housing crisis? It's a multifaceted crisis. There's not just one cause, and there's not actually just one housing crisis. It makes up multiple different things. There's obviously the social and public housing crisis. Currently, there's 4,000 plus people who are on a wait list for a public or social housing property in this city. And some of them are waiting up to 5 years for a property, which is just too long if you're in dire financial need. There's obviously the private rental affordable crisis, where most people sit who are in financial stress. They're in the private rental market. And at the moment, we just have a shortage of rentals, and rentals are increasing incredibly fast in price every day. We've got the housing choice crisis. The housing rental vacancy crisis also comes with that. In Canberra, we have a vacancy rate of less than 1%. That means less than 1% of properties that could be rented are actually vacant at this time. So that means when you get down to it, there's a positive correlation between the low level vacancy rate and the cost of rentals. We have the housing choice crisis. Currently, Canberra is very good at two things: an apartment or a detached home. Now, if you're someone like me, your choice is then buy an apartment or rent an apartment if you can, or get lucky in a land release somewhere in one of the new suburbs and hope you can get one, or try to fork out 1.5 million plus for a detached home and established property, which for most people of my generation is not currently possible. I'm a lawyer, I earn above median wage, and even for me that is well out of my radar, well out of my price range. So for the majority of my generation, and a lot of our working poorer Canberrans, that's just not possible. And then lastly, there is the house crisis and the wealth distribution crisis. This is a separate one that I think someone else alluded to earlier, which is we have a lot of investors who own multiple properties, and they have a large variety of them. But that's actually a separate crisis to the supply crisis that we're seeing in Canberra. So Canberra also has some unique challenges. As I think the former presenters alluded to, Canberra is one of the fastest growing cities in the country. Our growth rate has averaged 2.4% over the last 10 years, which is higher than any other city in this country. In the last 10 years, we've grown nearly 100,000 people. And if that trend continues, by 2050, we'll double. And if it continues by 2060, we'll reach 1 million people in our city. So we need to be thinking about how are we going to house 1 million people? Where are we going to house them?
Sorry, can I just make a quick comment on that?
Yes, of course.
Making predictions into the future at that distance is highly problematic because cities are constantly growing and shrinking over time.
Yes, yeah, I'm aware of it. We do this all the time. The census regularly predicts it and so on. I'm happy to take this at the end. But our prediction comes from the fact that the Australian census has always got our population wrong. They've always underestimated it. If you look at their population prediction over the last 30 years, They've always underestimated it. It is very true, you can check it yourself. And that's why we've done this calculation. Because, I mean, in the last census, they are under-predicted Canberra by 40,000 people. If they continue to do that...
I'll let you do it.
Fair enough. So, if we did reach that population, that's an additional 200,000 homes that we need to find a place to put in Canberra. And at the moment, when we're talking about things like we don't want urban sprawl and further greenfield development, how are we going to house these people, and how are we going to do it in a way that means that housing remains affordable? So we can't control the population growth in many ways. Australia as a country is growing. The territory doesn't have many levers to stop people moving here. People are going to move here. So when you accept that premise that there is nothing we can really do to stop people from moving to Canberra, we need to look at ways we can realistically house our population. So, the first part of the crisis, the social public housing crisis. There are currently 3,130 people on a public housing waitlist and 1,000 on the transfer list. Wait times are currently averaging between a year and 1,743 days, or about 5 years to get a property. And there are only 10,000 properties in the city at the moment. Just to keep up with our current population growth, the SD government would have to build 3,000 new homes over the next 10 years, public housing homes, not normal market rate homes, public housing properties. And that's completing one every single working day for the next 10 years. Currently, under the existing government arrangement with the coalition between Greens and Labour, only 660 new homes will be planned for in the next 3 years. So if we want to solve public and social housing, we need to actually enable housing ACT to build more housing. So there's a few barriers to this. Number one, zoning. 80% of our land area, by zone, is RZ1, which means you can build only a detached single home. That is the biggest lever the ACT government has to allow for building of more housing. Currently, relaxing this would allow Housing ACT to build more units and more public housing quicker and cheaper. And it would also allow for more market rate housing, which I'll go into afterwards. The other big barrier is litigation. Currently, new public and social housing developers are frequently subject to third-party appeals by people not directly affected by development. Anyone who puts submission in on a public housing development can then take it to court if they don't like the outcome. This ACAT challenge costs the ACT. Yep.
You access the...
No, sorry, we're not doing any questions. We'll let this presentation run. Thank you.
These challenges cost public and social housing a lot of money. For example, has anyone here heard of the YWCA Ainsley House Supportive Housing Club? That was a fairly modest 9-unit development to provide battered and domestic violence victims a safe place to move to, provided by WCCC. A very small number of local residents opposed it, and it ended up going to ACAT costing up to $250,000, which was a third of the total project's budget. So when you factor that in, that's a huge amount of money we're putting through a litigation system that stops public housing being delivered. So for example, in Griffiths, at the moment, just the Griffith and Narrabri Community Association is currently suing 3 different public housing developments on purely zone objective grounds. On the grounds that they don't meet the predominantly single dwelling character. In their submission to the planning committee, they spoke particularly about the fact they didn't want 3-unit developments in their area. And currently that's holding up multiple public housing developments, and this is a pattern we're seeing through our city.
Sorry, that's inaccurate. They're calling for dual occupancies.
Pardon?
That's inaccurate. They're calling for dual occupancies.
No, I've read his submission. I can quote it if you want. It says, we don't want 3-unit developments in our suburb. Line for line.
I'm going to come in here and call some order. I want questions through the microphone so people at home can hear them. Thanks, Brad. I think I respect that. Brad and Andrew.
No worries. So, if we want to more public housing, we need to allow basic housing to build more housing. It's a very simple concept, and it's something that we're pushing for. And now we have the second crisis, the market crisis, which is simply the market rate housing that we do not have enough of. Market rate housing unaffordability matters too. 90% of Australia's residential real estate is on the private market rather than being public-private. Canberra's is slightly better. We have more public housing and more social housing than the Australian average, but it's still very much apart. The vast majority of low-income people don't live in public housing. They live and exist in the private rental market or in the private real estate market. And this is particularly prevalent for younger and working class Australians. And you can see here some statistics. By age group, the largest number of renters sit in that 15 to 29 range, and it's becoming more prevalent and people are owning houses much later. And you can see here, Canberra's weekly rent has continuously gone up since about 2015, and over the course of time, right in 2013, 2014 is when we lost a large number of public servants. People moved away from a change of government. But since then, we've moved up our rent continuously, and Canberra has got more and more unaffordable. According to Actos, housing costs are the main driver of poverty in our city. They're a huge brake on economic growth. As I mentioned before, an average small business or medium-sized enterprise has to pay something $20,000 more a year than living in Sydney or Melbourne to compensate for the added housing costs. This costs the ACT economic growth, it costs us opportunities, it costs us the ability to grow as a city productively. Coffees cost more here than they do in inner city Melbourne, not because our baristas are better or because we all have disposable income, but because you have to pay people more to compensate for housing costs. And as housing costs grow, so do everything else. So, very low basic rates also decrease choice and increase risk. So that's a video, that was a video of some of our members at local rental showings, in which we can see lines of young people, 80 people long, viewing small single apartments. And this is a story that repeats itself across our city. So when vacancy rates are low, you hurt people by forcing them into markets where they have to accept properties that don't work for them, that might be damaged, that might not be up to spec, and they might have to pay more as a result, not just on rent, but then on energy costs and on fixing things and health costs that come with having poor properties. So the best way to increase high housing costs is to increase supply. Now this is the vast majority of evidence says so, and it's across a spectrum. We see examples of this from around the world, and the vast majority, I cannot emphasize this much, says this is a simple path to start increasing housing affordability. To quote one study, it is a necessary but not sufficient path. So Tulip Sanders, Tulip is a former RBA, Peter Tulip is a former RBA chief economist, and her empirical model of Australian housing market estimated that every 1% increase in supply leads to a 2.5% reduction in housing costs. Andre Menis, an economist at the University of Nuremberg, used detailed construction rates, and he concluded that more supply of housing lowers rents quite substantially over time. The key implication is that new housing supply provided by private developers effectively lowers rents through the rent distribution shortly after these new units are completed. So what does this tell us? To solve Canberra's housing crisis, we need to build more homes, and we need to allow more homes to be built. Auckland, in 2016, Auckland adopted an inventory plan that rezoned approximately 3/4 of its residential land by abolishing single-use housing, the equivalent of RZ1 in Canberra.
One of the most expensive cities in the world.
It's not anymore, actually. Wellington is now having, it's not, and I can get to that in 2 seconds, but I have the statistics right here. This was so successful that in National Parliament they passed an act to apply it nationwide. And you can see from that, from the moment they started allowing upzoning, a lot more homes were built. And here is an example. The permits, which is the number of homes submitted to start construction and completions, closely followed. And soon after they allowed upzoning, the permits massively increased, and so did following the completion of housing a couple of years later. And rents fell, on average, compared to the rest of New Zealand. Real rents fell, and nominal rents fell over time. And you can see that quite well here. This is versus CPI. You'll see that Wellington begins to tail off and begins to fall compared to the rest of New Zealand and CPI levels. Rents fell. Median rent to median incomes have dropped substantially from 27% to 20%. So we saw a 2.7% drop in the amount of percent of people's income they were spending on rent, which may not seem like a lot as a percentage, but that's a couple of $100 a week. And that's thousands of dollars a year that people were able to save on housing costs. That can drive poverty downwards. And we can do it here. I mean, our own housing choices collaboration report in the EPSDD recommended legalising dual occupancies in RZ1 in 2018. In a craft area plan, we could adopt many of the RZ2 rules. That's terrace homes, townhouses and duplexes. These aren't massive apartment blocks. This is small, sensible density with gardens, which I know a lot of people are talking about here, in shaded streets with good connections. Terrace homes are a great example of ways you can use land more efficiently. And we could go further and look at adopting the medium density residential standards that New Zealand passed and saw massive increases in housing construction. There's also a lot of other benefits to density. There's better for the environment. Dense development is more effective at reducing greenhouse gases than weatherproofing or energy-proofing existing homes by quite a substantial margin. Recent studies from the US have found that urban areas produce 50% less emissions per capita than suburban equivalents. And that's simply because people don't have to drive as far to get their goods. They can walk to local areas. There is shopping and options available, and there's more demand for commercial.
The study in the US would show that driving fine because they could go in apartments.
That's not true at all. I mean, the best study comes from New York, which is most European study where they do that least. So it's better for the budget. The average cost for the ASD government to add new services for a detached home is between $50,000 and $60,000. The average cost to add a new service to a unit or a townhouse or a development in infield is about $5,000. People talk a lot about rates going up, but part of the reason rates go up is because the land value that people are sitting on has increased dramatically as part of this housing cost and the housing unaffordability. And one of the reasons they also go up is because it's so much more expensive to run services to a detached area. You have to subsidise public transport, sewage, energy at a much higher level than you do for the density. It's also better for public health. We've seen a large number of studies, I've just put one up there, there's a lot out there, that talk about how urban areas actually can increase public health. People walk more, people have less chronic illnesses, less car reliant, and leads to overall better health outcomes. And it's better for the economy. We have seen that denser cities attract more productive workers, they create more innovations, and they allow more minds to come together. There has been a study by Hatch and Moratti, which found that zoning restrictions in the US have cost the US economy 36% of its potential growth over the last 50 years.
It's the concentration of capital in the drives production.
Except it doesn't, because people can't, workers can't afford to live there, so that capital gets squandered. That's the point they're making.
People go to these places because they want to break even, and then they leave because they want to profit.
No, that's not what happens. The economics says that. What happens is that industries conglomerate around each other. There's a reason why 80% of our industries and biggest corporations conglomerate around 2 kilometres within the CBD. Yes, and there's a reason why they do that. Let me spell it out very clearly for you.
I understand the question.
So do I.
Finish the presentation.
Yeah. It's not misinformation. I'm literally citing the sources there. You can look up, I can give you 100 different sources of the same thing. So what is Greater Canberra doing to achieve better density and better outcome in the city? Well, we're meeting with MLAs. We have met with MLAs from every major party. We've discussed with Peter Kane, I think we met with Joe before Joe's office, we've met with the Labour Planning Minister, and we've discussed and pushed our views about what we think works. We have made a submission to the Legislative Assembly inquiry. We can look online and see us performing in front of the ACT inquiry into homelessness and housing affordability. We've spoken in front of that committee, and we provided submission to the planning bill. We will also be next Tuesday talking in front of the committee our views and our submissions to the planning bill. We're talking to stakeholders. It's why I'm here today. I'm here to talk to the community about what we're doing. We're talking to people like community housing projects, the WCCC, who want to produce more community housing to help cover that need in our city. We're working on draft territory plans. We've got our members involved, combing through them, identifying issues and problems that we have with them, and trying to build a better future. We're running campaigns on specific issues, where we formed out of the Manor House campaign. We were an open letter to get that thing built, and it got called in by the Minister as part of our campaign, our concentrated campaign. And we're running more like that. We also ran a submission campaign to get the YWCA housing completed in Ainslie. And we're just out trying to talk to everyday Canberrans about improving their lives, and the feedback we get is splendid. More people find us accidentally online and come in and say, this is exactly what I'm looking for, this is exactly what I want to talk to. So, where are we now? As many people in this room know, you just had a presentation of EPSDD on it. We're at the planning system review, which is the most difficult and significant project we've had to come across so far. I can tell you over the last month and a half, we were combing through that bill, we were finding parts to it, we were looking for what we thought was right. And we had a few issues with it, and we've made that submission, and we've made clear that what we want changed. We've met with MLAs on this issue, we've outlined the issues we've had. We've attended the Environmental Planning Forum briefing along with other community councils to talk about the issues we have and about what we want to see as planning outcomes. And we've done a multi-pronged campaign. We're focusing on things like the affordability objective. Currently in the planning bill, there's no requirement for planners to consider affordability when looking at building our city. And we want that changed. We want that to be a key consideration of how they plan our city. We talked about ACAT reform. We proposed a model which removes this sort of quasi-judicial system which is made to build for individual rights but ends up deciding our planning system. And we want a model which engages the community earlier, gives them a real say over their local area, but also allows planning to be made by planning experts, not by unelected ACAT officials. We want it to be responsible to a minister who is elected to people, and then if the minister does a decision that people don't like, we can get rid of them next election. We want a democratic system that reflects the community. We've done extensive submission on our planning bill. It's available online on our website. We've also will be performing for the Assembly next week. And we've done 8 media appearances, and you can see us, we've been performing in the Rider, in the Canberra Times, and multiple other areas. So, if you want to get involved, we have a public Discord. We're open to anyone. Anyone can join us. You don't have to be from any particular area. Don't be any age group. We want to hear people's views, and we want to work out how to make Canberra better. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. And now I'll go to questions.
Do you receive any funding or assistance from the NBA, HIA, or the ACT government? Because a lot of what you're pushing sounds like the deregulation and the supply side of only economics pushed by those organisations. You've completely ignored the demand side, which is what the most of the serious economists are writing about, and what the RBA's investigation into housing supply showed just a couple of years ago, that we produce more housing than we possibly can consume. And the demand side clearly shows that we've been spending too much money, and that's what's been driving up the prices. Too many subsidies for developers, and allowing developers to land bank to drip feed into the market to keep the prices high. You've ignored all of that. You've done none of that research, and you've looked into none of that side. You've got the supply side, and that's it. But I do want to know, because on your Facebook page it says you're a political organisation, not a community organisation. Do you receive funding from other organisations that push the supply side agenda?
No. We have received no funding from the SD government, from any developer, from anyone except our members. Currently in our bank account, and it was all published at our AGM, I think we have $1,500.
What about non-financial support?
We receive no support from anyone. Everything we do as volunteers. I have personally I'm a lawyer, I charge quite highly for my time. If I put the amount of time I put in to go to Canberra as a monetary figure.
So why do your arguments sound like you're talking closer to HIA?
Look, I'll answer that simply because the majority of the evidence says that. And you can disagree with me what not.
You haven't shown the other side.
The RBA says supply is an issue. Their chief economist, former chief economist, says
We have more questions.
no worries. I'll let him ignore the evidence he wants.
I was just going to, some of your comments, points, views, whatever, I think are valid. There is a need as part of the strategy discussion to look at some townhouse type developments. Certainly some of the community members I talked to want to downsize. They want low rise, they don't want stairs or anything like that because of their age. Another couple that got burnt out of their house, moved down the street to us. That house was a fluffy house. They were keen to get rid of it, but moved back into the neighbourhood. They wanted a flat block. They couldn't afford that, on their income, because they'd already retired, they couldn't actually afford, so the government bullied them off their land, sold it off for profit. $1.1 million for 2 duplexes so that's still unaffordable, right, to most people. So the solution is, what you're saying is right, but the way we go about it and the affordability bit is a bit that is not working. And that is the developer and the amount of money that they're making off the top of it all. Your other bit about livability and the identification, and you're trying to spruik about how great it is, go to Malongo and talk to anyone that lives out there about whether or not they live and work in that neighbourhood.
I think
go there. That is the reason why so many Canberrans don't trust densification in the model, because they go to Malongo and they say, I do not want that. I do not want to have to drive in Cotter Road or on a bus or whatever.
Andrew,
sorry?
You're now preaching to us.
Yeah.
I just get you know. So I don't disagree with you.
I think Andrew's made some points there, and the first one about ageing in place definitely is an important one. And when I say things become more affordable, I'm not saying overnight, and I'm not saying straight away. An individual spot op zoning doesn't do that. In fact, it does exactly what you said it does. If the current way we do up zoning in Canberra, the EPSDD identify a land use area, they up zone it, they sell it to a developer at a single rate. That does exactly what you said it does. It benefits rich developers because they're the only people who can produce density, because they're the only ones allowed to or able to afford it. What we're calling for is not that. We don't want to feed the cartel of developers that exist. What we want is to give ordinary people the chance to redevelop their properties into duplexes or triplexes, and you can age in place.
I was just going to say, the reason I actually got up was when you started talking about ACT housing, social housing, and public housing. And as someone that has lived in a neighbourhood and been exposed to the way the government operates, I just want to make a point on behalf of the lot of people that we don't want to develop the social housing in these neighbourhoods. They threatened us. It wasn't an natural thing. They hid it from us right up to the election, sprung on us over it. There was a method to getting urban development done in a way that the whole community supports. The delivery model that we got from ACT Housing, again, did not deliver any trust. And as for you saying that it's costing YMCA, whatever it is, I had 8 lawyers against us. The government doesn't act as a model to give them any of us either. So we've got to change the entire way we do things.
Look, I'm not a representative of the SC government. I can't speak to their motives or the way they do stuff. But from our perspective, we do want a planning system that accounts for everyone and gets community input. The model we put in instead of a ACAT we put up was one that said clearly and simply that we want the community to be involved in that planning process, not in Lisbon State. We want the community to be able to say, if you're going to put community housing near us, let us know what it's going to look like, and let us be able to have an input on it in a way that actually allows it to be built, but gives us the agency to feel like we've been heard. Like I'm not here on behalf of the AC government. I don't represent the AC government, I don't work for the AC government, and I don't work for AC housing. I think there's a lot of legitimate criticism of AC housing out there, and I think that's one of them. I'm not here to defend them. I'm saying we want more public housing to be built, and we have a better model for doing so, and I will venture that we would really appreciate your insights if you want to contact us with the issues you've had, because that'll help us form our policy in the future. Think of us as a non-government think tank in many ways, where if you send us your ideas, we'll factor them in, because that's stuff we want to hear and know. So I can't speak to the work of the AC housing or AC government. I don't work for them. I don't know. I don't run them or anything. But if you have issues with them, let us know, because those are things we can factor into the models we develop and the ideas that we push.
I've got a quick question about the numbers and seeking clarification. You said that we need 200,000 dwellings over the next 30 years, which I think, it's quite surprising, because that's more than the total number of dwellings we have at the moment. According to the 2021 census, I think we have less than 180,000 dwellings in the ACT. So it just seems a bit over the top that you're suggesting that we double the number of dwellings in Canberra in 30 years.
Well, that number is taken from the fact that our population expectations are higher than the AST government.
No, if you actually look at, you're talking about 1 million, say 550,000 extra people in the next 30 years, I think works out at about 18,000. Now that's way more than about the 10,000 extra per year that we were getting in the last few years. So I think it's really over the top.
It's based on our population growth rate of 2.4%, which
No,
is
it's not.
It is.
If you look, I looked at treasury figures and stuff like that.
Mary, I think you're not understanding what I'm saying. I'm not saying that ours is based on their figures. I'm saying that we find the treasury figures to be incredibly low because they have constantly predicted a lower population rate than what has actually occurred. When we did the maths, the AST has grown by 2.4% per year over the last 10 years. And if that were to continue, which it could as we reopen in COVID, then we would need an extra 200,000 homes. We're not saying that's exactly what's going to happen. We're saying that we should be planning for a future where that's a possibility, because that is very much a real possibility.
I'm going to come in on this. I'll go back to my point, and I think, Miriam, hopefully you will support me next week. The ACT government does not have an actuary. It cannot make its own assessment. That's why we got caught with 26,000.
Well,
we don't know where it's going.
Well, can I give you an example then? Like, the Inner North District strategy, on their own low numbers, predicts there will need 25,000 new dwellings. In the Inner North strategy, they're only planning to deliver 21,000. So even on their low dwelling plans, on their low population estimates, they're not delivering enough homes in their area. And if we go to a population growth rate of 2.4%, even if that might not happen, if we go to 2.4%, we're going to need a whole lot more than just the 4,000 extra homes they're missing. We're probably going to need an extra 10,000 in that time period. What we're saying is not that a 1 million person Canberra is definitely going to happen. What we're saying is that's a possibility, and a very real possibility if you look at our history. And if you look at our history and we don't plan for that future, we're going to end up with a Canberra which is simply unaffordable for people, where people won't be able to come here and everyone will suffer. Our economic growth rate will drop. We will have an aging population where we won't have the tax revenue to support it. We won't be able to get newer, younger people in, and our economics of our state will suffer. This isn't my argument. But
You're supporting my argument. We need better data. There's 2 more people here.
Just a quick question. When is Australia going to stop foreign investment buying up all our properties, especially the capital cities, to leave them empty, reducing supply and increasing prices which our own citizens cannot buy?
I don't represent the Australian government, so I can't speak to that. Our organisation is a community organisation at the AST level, so we focus on that. We have met with some federal members like Senator Pocock before, but I can't really speak to federal government investment property.
In Sydney and Melbourne there have been hundreds of thousands since about 2014, and I believe in Canberra there are a lot of properties just vacant.
Well, can I speak to the vacancy? Our statistics based on water usage in the ACT suggest there's a vacancy rate of less than 1%, which means that less than 1% of possibly occupied residents are actually are currently vacant. And to go to the point someone mentioned earlier, the census figures are a bit misleading because they deal with anyone who wasn't in a property at the time. So that could be someone who is not home because they're out of work, it could be someone who was on holiday, it could be someone whose house is being renovated, or it could just be a property that's not fit for habitation. So they're misleading, but when you look at our water usage rates and our actual rental vacancy rates, they're much lower. I can't speak to Sydney or Melbourne. We work for a Canberra, or I volunteer for this Canberra organisation, and the issue is that I can't speak really to federal government policy on investment from foreign aid. That's a question I would recommend you take up with your senator or whatever.
There has been articles in the media at that time, and I believe there are thousands in Canberra that are vacant. And I don't think just being vacant on the 1 night for a reason makes up all that.
No, but what I'm saying is that when you look at the water usage over the period, those properties aren't vacant because the water usage actually suggests that people are living and using those properties. So that's a regular water usage over time.
Hi, you seem quite knowledgeable on planning and things like that. Have you ever worked for the ACT government, or have you worked for Nick Gentleman or any other ministers?
Yeah, I work for McGentleman.
Thank you.
Is that, sorry,
Gentleman? Thank
yep.
you. So, yes, you've worked for Nick Gentleman.
Yeah.
Okay. So, does anyone know what astroturfing is?
I'm sorry, are you just coming here to accuse me? Do you have nothing to say to me? So you're trying to disparage my argument?
No, but I'm just aware that a lot of this
I can tell you that I haven't interacted with Mr. Gentleman in about 3 years, except I think he might have liked my post about being engaged earlier this year.
That's the long game. So what I'd like to ask you is, what are you going to build these 20,000 houses with? What resources will you be building them with?
Once again, I'm not a builder. I'm not the one building them. But evidence...
You just want 20,000 houses and that's your argument?
No.
For the 250,000?
As bad faith as this line of questioning is, let me engage with you.
No, it's good faith because...
I'm not here to talk about me building houses.
Yeah.
What I'm bringing up here is saying that one of the biggest barriers to house building we have in the city is the fact we don't let people build homes. And if you don't let people build homes, it doesn't matter how much it costs to build them. It doesn't matter what you build them out of, because you can't. And that's the biggest barrier.
We do let people build homes, and we have planning in accordance with an agreed set of
Yeah,
behaviours
we
around
are
that.
under...
You're trying to shift that so far to the left or the right or wherever it is. And previous tonight we've had the EPSDD come along and be over the other side. And in the middle we've got our heroes of the Greens. But what I'm saying is that your arguments are quite hypothetical. They're not that rooted in reality, but what they do is they actually end up stretching the argument so far that it becomes unrealistic and untenable.
I mean, it's reality. It happened in Auckland. We have that example right there. That's a
This is Canberra, and we prefer to just deal with Canberra stuff. So
you want to ignore the evidence that exists that is very real.
Well, that's evidence in a different place. This is Canberra, and this is Weston Creek. And actually, you're an unelected person who's coming in here pitching like you're going to drive in a particular manner. These people here and us, we want to speak to. Yes.
It's a debate.
Well,
I want to question.
I just think the presentation should be,
I invited him to come along. I invited to come along and speak. He's spoken.
Look, it's quite clear to me that you're not interested in engaging seriously. And that's fine. I'm not here to pitch myself for an election. I'm not running for office. I'm not here on behalf of ACT government. I'm not here because I care, because I want to be a community representative. I'm here. I'm not paid for this. You can make any defamatory claim you want, but I'm not paid for this. This is purely voluntary. I do this outside my job hours on my spare time because I want a better city. So
Can I ask you a quick question? You mentioned that you identified occupancy based on water consumption. Could you share where you got that from?
it comes from Icon Water's, yes, it comes from the Icon Water report on water usage in the ACT. They classify anything under 50 litres of water per day as a vacant home, and anything more than that as occupied. That's where it came from.
So that's where you got the data?
Yes.
One thing I would share is that perhaps the confusion around, so the suggestion that constant building, that what we're having is a housing supply crisis. Constant building's been going on in Melbourne and Sydney for a long time, and there's massive homelessness. The other thing I would say is look up land financialisation, because what we're observing here, and this planning strategy that's now coming to the ACT, has been in play for 30 years in Australia, roughly 25 years. It's an economic model, and land financialisation is what creates housing affordability and has in all of the countries where it's been. I'm sure you're aware of this. But for anybody else, look up land financialisation, because that's why we're experiencing a housing affordability crisis. And I think that's really, for mine, based on all the academic research I've read, where there are significant misunderstandings in some of the arguments that we put forward this evening. But thanks for coming to share it anyway.
Look, I will read whatever you want me to read. I'm open to the evidence. My group is not here to prosecute a single view. We're pushing for this because that's what the majority of the evidence says. And by a long shot, supply is what drives house prices. A lack of it, sorry. So when you talk to me about land financialisation, and you talk to me about vacancy rates, and you talk to me about supply not having impact, I can just look at the hundreds of journal articles of research papers that say the opposite. The vast majority of it say the opposite.
That is, I'm afraid, incorrect. So I spent 3 years...
I mean, it's not. I can give you 100 sources now. I have them on a computer.
Look, I don't want to. I'm just saying land financialisation is uncontroversially at the heart of the issues that are being experienced in the modern industrialised world. There are academics across disciplines that accept this. It's not a controversial point. So all I would say is either, if you're unfamiliar with that, then tune in to that literature because it will provide a greater context of understanding as to why just simply building more homes is not going to solve this problem.
Cameron Murray, Martin.
I've watched Cameron Murray. Cameron Murray is what people refer to as the climate skeptics of the property industry.
Now that's information.
Not really. Cameron Murray has been universally condemned by most academics on this area as particularly poor.
Quoted by the RBA.
And the RBA chief economist disagreed with him, published a whole paper pointing out why he was wrong.
I can provide the evidence.
I just had a question about zoning.
Yes.
You said about the RZ1s that you can't build. Like, what was your statement about RZ1s, about the supply and the RZ1s being a problem and you can't build them?
Well, the issue with RZ1 is RZ1 is very restrictive. For the majority of standardised RZ1, you can only build a single detached home under the existing rules. So what we're wanting to do is allow people to build a duplex or build a triplex in their area. So say you own a property just up the road here, and maybe the rates have got quite expensive, your land's quite valuable, but you don't want to move away. You want to live in your local area. What we prefer to do is allow you to split your land in half, build a duplex, sell the other half. Then you have, you've built an extra house. You're housing an extra person in our city, but at the same time, you now have the ability to live in your same area in a nice home that's probably at a higher energy rating, probably going to be cheaper to live in over the long term.
And then they put the rates up.
Well, I can't speak to government rates policy. I don't decide it. So.
You haven't mentioned it. So
I just haven't finished because I think you can. I thought you could build a second residence in an RZ1, you just can't subdivide.
You can build certain second residences. The big issue, yes, is the
You can build a second residence.
Yeah,
So you can build two on an RZ1 block.
You can only build two in certain specifications, and you can't subdivide.
Yeah, but you can build two. It's just that you can't subdivide the block itself separately.
Yes, and what we propose is allow that, but also allow triplexes and reasonably sized blocks and complexes.
Anyway, I just think, when you say you can't build two, you can.
Sorry, I'll clarify that you can't build your occupancy under our science system.
You can't
build
subdivide.
yes.
Yeah.
Which is a big problem when it comes to actually being able to sell on and take advantage of that
So,
system.
I see people building second residences in that.
Sorry, I should have clarified exactly what I meant, but yes.
I'm going to have to call it a night.
Yeah, no problem.
I loved it. Great talk. Thank you very much. My main worry is that we get tired. I said in 20 minutes the alarm goes off again. And I've got some meeting stuff to finish. So thank you very much.
If anyone wants to talk to me afterwards, or even contact me or via Gmail.
Okay. Now, I'm going to skip all the chair's report stuff and all that, because Rosemary's got me off the perch. You looked at me like that. Look, what I do want to cover is the minutes from last meeting, though. Can we get somebody to move and second? Thank you, Rosemary. No changes? Great. No. Who was the last meeting? Was the second one? Mark? Anything else I need to do, Michelle? No. Thank you very, very much, and we really appreciate the help stacking all this stuff up. We're on a tight deadline now. Thank you very much. I think it's been a great meeting.